Good morning, everybody. Today's hearing is meant to examine the human cost of our soft on crime policies, and particularly to highlight the Trump administration's effort to reduce violent crime. It's been over a month since Trump administration took swift action to stop crime in our nation's capital. Those efforts resulted in a 53% reduction in murders, a 57% reduction in robberies, and a 75% reduction in carjackings. Now, my Democrat colleagues would surely welcome these reductions, but from some of their language, you wonder whether they do. There ought to be a breath of sigh relief from them that more families were spared the cost of crime, which are so often paid in lives lost, laughter silenced, and families left irreparably broken. Instead, they've spun an Orwellian tale defaming their political opponents as quote-unquote authoritarians, engaged in quote-unquote abuses of government and military power to target and punish dissent. That's the end of that quote. This self-serving narrative doesn't make America safer. It harms victims who plead for secure communities and the law enforcement officers targeted by radicals. Need I remind these self-declared defenders of the rule of law of the very laws that were abandoned for open borders years ago? Those foolish policies paroled over 6,000 people either on the FBI's terrorist screening center watch list or with criminal records into the United States, and the same 4 years lost track of over 2 million known gotaways. The act of, quote, upholding the rule of law, end of quote, is not a political exercise for an election season. It's the duty of government all over to protect and serve, extends only to political allies of some of these Democrat leaders. Just this month, the Department of Homeland Security reported that police under Governor Pritzker's sanctuary jurisdiction refused to answer multiple calls for assistance when violent rioters physically assaulted federal immigration officers. Those unlawfully present in the United States may potentially be subject to both criminal prosecution and immigration removal proceedings. An Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago resulted in the arrest of illegal migrants convicted of assault, domestic violence, and murder. And those are just the criminal records the United States can access. I'd like to remind my colleagues that foreign criminal records often are not accessible, particularly from countries like Venezuela. We titled this hearing, quote, Blue City Chaos and Tragedy, end quote, because 18 of the top 20 most crime-ridden cities are controlled by Democrats preaching and implementing soft-on-crime policies. In fact, in 2022, the Heritage Foundation released a report finding a supermajority of high-crime cities in red states are, quote, deep blue and ran by left-wing ideologues, end of quote. Those ideologues abuse federal grant money to push anti-victim policies in local prosecutors' offices and thwart immigration law. In June, I released a report outlining how the Soros-backed Vera Institute of Justice used federal funds to embed in progressive prosecutor offices. Those prosecutors declined to charge a repeat sexual predator, release violent criminals back into the community to reoffend, and investigated their political opponents. In Congress, good faith efforts by some Republicans to work collaborative on gun solutions through the Bipartisan Safer Community Act quickly turned to political opportunism. Democrats abandoned their promise to adhere strictly to legislative text and authorize warrantless searches of any lawful gun owner who dared to transact a single gun sale from their home. Many suffered under Biden's administration's tortured reading of the law and executive overreach, but none more so than victims who lost their loved ones in violent crime. Many of those individuals welcome President Trump's effort to make their communities safer. To the National Guard and law enforcement officers working to make America safer, I think all of my colleagues would join me in saying thank you for your service. The left-leaning media has alleged the National Guard is bored. If anything, I think that's a sign of their presence is deterring violence. Before I turn to Ranking Member Durbin, I'm going to take a minute for a video that shows the human cost of self-on-crime policies. So please listen for 1 minute.
The juveniles have run the city, not just the city, but cities across the country, whether it's Memphis, Philadelphia, Chicago, whether it's Baltimore.
And the fact of the matter is you can get up every morning in this city and you can say somebody's going to get murdered.
A man who is believed to be in his 40s, who was just an innocent person driving on Ohio Street when one of the suspects from this burglary here outside of the Louis Vuitton store was driving southbound on Michigan Avenue, crashed into that van.
The other way and allow this to happen every single day.
It's what happens when repeat offenders are allowed to cycle through arrest after arrest without meaningful accountability. It's what happens when there are no real consequences.
But the bottom line is, how do we get crime under control?
We have to do something in order to show we're trying every avenue to make Chicago a better place. It just can't be, no, you're not coming here because we don't like you politically.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't think I'd see a video clip of former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich as part of your presentation. Convicted, serving time, received a pardon from President Trump. This is such a political hearing, and it shouldn't be. What's at stake here is something that we all value, and that is the safety in our families, in our homes, and our neighborhoods. I regret that you have referenced this hearing to focus on, quote, blue city chaos. That is a political reference, for sure. Mr. Chairman, violent crime is on the decline, but statistics don't mean much to victims, and I thank Ms. Cook for being here. As a father, I can only imagine your grief, and I thank you for your courage in testifying. Any crime is too much crime, and every American deserves to feel safe. So we should be working together on a bipartisan basis, which we have done over and over again in this committee, to continue reducing crime and making our communities safer for all Americans. Unfortunately, this hearing is not going to help us reach that goal. Look no further than its title, Blue City Chaos, which falsely suggests that communities with Democratic leaders are less safe than communities with Republican leaders. Let's look at the reality. For the last 2 decades, the murder rate in my home state of Illinois has been lower than the murder rate in Missouri, Louisiana, and Alabama, all states represented by Republicans on this committee. Or take a look at Shreveport, Louisiana, a city with a Republican mayor and a Republican governor represented in Congress by the Speaker of the House and 2 Republican senators. FBI statistics show that Shreveport has a higher violent crime rate than Washington, D.C. In 2023, Illinois spent $516 per capita on policing, more than the state of Iowa, South Carolina, Texas, Utah, Missouri, North Carolina, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Alabama. Who is funding police? In Chicago, over the first 6 months of this year, homicide rates are down 32%, shootings have dropped 37%. We need to build on this success, not ignore it. During my time as chair of this committee, I held more than a dozen hearings on reducing violent crime. We focused on legislation, not lamentation. I reported numerous bills supporting law enforcement that were signed into law by President Biden, including Protecting America's First Responders Act and the Recruit and Retain Act. And we passed the historic Bipartisan Safer Communities Act to crack down on gun violence. Instead of political theater and partisan attacks, we should focus on providing proven efforts like the HEAL Initiative, a project I launched in 2018 with 10 of Chicago's largest hospitals to address the root causes of violence in 18 Chicago neighborhoods with the highest rates of violence, poverty, and health disparity. Unfortunately, President Trump has done everything he can to undermine efforts like this. He cut $169 million from community safety funding authorized by the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. He cut $72 million in funding for state and local law enforcement. The 2026 Trump budget would slash the High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas Program, better known as HIDA, by more than a third, from about $300 million to $196 million. These HIDA cuts are strongly opposed by law enforcement, and the Trump White House itself conceded that HIDA is, quote, an effective and efficient use of taxpayers' money and an important tool in the nation's effort to stop drug trafficking and save American lives. While President Trump claims to be tough on crime, he granted full and unconditional pardon to nearly 1,600 January 6 rioters, including more than 600 charged with assaulting law enforcement. Here's the reality. President Trump isn't interested in reducing crime. He's interested in political posturing. 100 troops into the city of Chicago. Did you hear the announcement this morning by the Secretary of Defense? One of the characteristics he insists on when it comes to building a strong military is that it be apolitical. His word, apolitical. The president has deployed thousands of troops to Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., and made disturbing threats to wage war against Chicago, Portland, and other American cities. Let's be clear, these are illegal, unconstitutional, and un-American power grabs by the president that actually endangers Americans. President Trump is looking for an excuse to send soldiers into American communities so he can play the role of strongman on television. In Illinois, his misguided mass deportation is targeting communities, but it's not making them safer. Remember the litany that we heard over and over again about immigrants to this country? Rapists, murderers, terrorists, the criminally insane. Did you know that 70% of the immigrants detained so far by the president so far have no criminal conviction? None. The administration's main focus seems to be photo ops for social media, like these pictures from downtown Chicago of armed, masked men just happened to feature the Trump Tower in the background. And just yesterday, we learned the Department of Homeland Security requested the deployment of 100 military personnel to Illinois over the objections of the governor. Simply put, despite what the Secretary of Defense said at Quantico this morning, the president's use of the military to police American streets is political theater, staged for his MAGA supporters, not effective law enforcement aimed at making communities safer. Meanwhile, thousands of FBI, DEA, and ATF agents, as well as thousands of service members across this country, have been diverted from critical missions to carry out the president's immigration agenda. Not surprisingly, federal drug prosecutions this year have dropped to the lowest in decades. So to parade the military in these cities, we are diverting talent and skill away from federal drug prosecutions. Does that make America safe? We need to support law enforcement and policies that improve and not erode trust between them and our communities. As a ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I will not sit idly by while this president tramples the Constitution. And I will use every tool at my disposal to reduce crime and protect our communities in a lawful way that promotes lasting change. I yield.
Yeah, I want to take a minute to say something to emphasize what I said, and I'll give you a minute if you want to react to what I say.
Can you put the microphone?
Democrats missed a key data point when they assert that the most violent cities are in red states. Almost all of those cities are run by Democrat mayors. Axio reports that of the 20 cities with more than 100,000 residents and the highest murder rate, 19 have a Democrat mayor. President Trump is willing to work with these mayors, but they keep turning down the offer for help despite the fact that President Trump's efforts are working in places like D.C. and Memphis. Without objection, I'd like to enter into the record press releases from DEA and the Marshal Service detailing these successes. Do you have anything you want to say? No. Okay. Then I'll introduce the three witnesses from our panel, and Ranking Member Durbin will introduce his. Then we'll swear in the group and take their testimony. First is Mrs. Felicia Cook. Ms. Cook is a D.C. local. Her life was turned upside down on April 23, 2017, when her grandson Marty was shot, killed. He was a hardworking 22-year-old man who left the house that day for a date. Marty never returned home. He was shot 7 times. Thank you for appearing, Mrs. Cook. Now we have Detective Greg Pemberton. Detective Pemberton worked at the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, D.C. He's head of the D.C. Police Union. As head of the union, Detective Pemberton represents over 3,000 women and men of the Metropolitan Police Department. Detective Pemberton brings his firsthand experience battling crime to Washington, D.C. to discuss current policies. Thank you. Finally, we have Tennessee State Senator Brent Taylor. Senator Taylor hails from Tennessee's 31st District, which covers a portion of the city of Memphis and its surrounding suburbs. Since being elected to office in 2023, Senator Taylor has been known for being tough on crime. Senator Taylor knows well the impact that progressive soft on crime policies have on cities. I'm grateful for his leadership in his home state to combat these policies. Senator Durbin.
Gregory Jackson Jr. is here, president of the Rocket Foundation, founded in 2022 to end gun violence in America. A gun violence survivor himself, he previously served as deputy director of the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention and special assistant to President Biden. He's also served as executive director of the Community Justice Action Fund, which advances policies to address gun violence. Thanks for being here, Mr. Jackson. Yeah. And we also welcome Major General William Enhart, a retired member of the U.S. Air Force and Army National Guard. His nearly 36-year military career, including active duty service in the Air Force, 30 years in the Army National Guard, His service culminated as Adjutant General of the Illinois National Guard, commanding both the Air and Army National Guard from 2007 to 2012. He previously served as Brigadier General and Deputy Commanding General of the Illinois Army National Guard. Thank you, Major Enyart, for being here today.
Now I ask if you'll stand, please. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yeah. Let the record reflect that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Mrs. Cook, we'll start out with you. And sometimes make sure you push the red button. Yeah.
No. Is the red button on? It is. Perhaps you could.
Can. Could you, General, can you change with her?
Sorry. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Grassley, and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee for having me today. My name is Felicia Cook. I'm a lifelong Washingtonian. My grandson, Marty William McMillan Jr., was tragically murdered in Washington, D.C. on April 23rd, 2017. Marty was my firstborn grandson. We were very close. My world turned upside down the day he died. It felt as though everything had gone dark, and even breathing became painful. We had no answers. It seemed like no one really cared. After weeks of not hearing from anyone, I was shocked to learn that no one had been assigned to Marty's case at the 5th District. My own family investigated, solved the case. On Marty's birthday, January 11th, 2018, my daughter received a devastating news that the coroner had Marty's remains. It was found on the side of the road on Suitland Parkway. It had been 9 long months since we had seen or heard anything. I was told that they couldn't charge my grandson's killer with first-degree murder. He shot my grandson in cold blood 7 times. And they didn't consider that as first-degree murder. They act like we would be lucky if we got manslaughter. The bottom line is that murder in D.C. is treated as a joke when it comes time to justice. My Marty killer received only maybe 16 years, which will likely be served concurrently with the time he was already serving for the charge of guns and drugs. In total, he may end up doing just 10 years in an actual jail. And 5 of those may be probation. How can that be? After years of waiting to go to trial, the judge, after hearing my family's impact statements, asked the killer if he had anything he wanted to say. She said to him, "It must be a stressful day for you to have to sit here and listen to all of that." He killed our loved one And after everything we went through, they seem to be more sympathetic to him than us, the victims. How long do we have to suffer? This must change. We need to stop killers being sentenced with minimum time, allowing them to come back come back out and potentially kill someone else. This is wrong. Someone needs to change these laws. I don't care who makes the changes. It needs to happen. I'm simply asking for someone to do the right thing, please. If you take a life, you should serve a life. That's my opinion. A life sentence. It's just that simple. I'm grateful for President Trump, and I am, for hearing my voice. As he's doing something to make this thing safe. I can see the total difference since President Trump been focusing on D.C. I'm more comfortable being here. I feel safer here. I know others do too. I do. Thank you for listening. And it took this administration to address and have me heard, allow me to be heard. I appreciate thanking and everyone that took the time to hear me, because no one heard me before. I did rallies and marches. I stood in the Department of Justice. I went to see Mayor Bowser. I asked him to help. And my family did not get justice, and nobody heard me until now. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
My microphone on. General, you probably have to change places so you can be heard. Please proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and Senators. My name is William Enyart. I'm a retired Major General. The last 5 years of my service, I was the Adjutant General, that's the Commanding General, for the 13,000 soldiers and airmen of the Illinois National Guard. I had guardsmen in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We had the largest combat deployment since World War II. I served nearly 36 years in the military. I come from a proud family of veterans. My father, brother, and I served a total of nearly 64 years. We each served as enlisted members. I was commissioned an officer in 1982. After military retirement, I was elected to Congress, where I served on the House Armed Services Committee. I recite these facts so that you understand that I have experience at the enlisted, officer, general officer, and policymaker level. This experience forms the basis of what I will tell you today. I'm here to talk with you about appropriate uses of the National Guard. The National Guard has a proud history of service to our nation, from pre-Revolutionary War days to the World Wars to today's conflicts. The National Guard is the best trained military reserve force in the world. There were times during the Iraq War that the Army National Guard provided more than half of our combat power in Iraq. We train in military skills, not police skills, to provide part-time soldiers for our nation's defense. Our other equally important role is as a trained and ready force for the governors. In our state role, we deploy to assist in disaster recovery. We deployed to New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina, to Illinois for Mississippi River floods, to St. Louis for tornadoes, the Nevada Air National Guard for forest fires, to name but a few. You've heard what we are. Here's what we're not. We're not trained as police officers. Our soldiers may receive a couple of hours a year in civil disturbance training. We do not receive the months and years of training required to become qualified police officers. We're not trained to perform arrests, to perform traffic stops, to perform investigations, to follow up on crime tips. The calls to mobilize the Guard fail to understand this, nor do they understand the costs to mobilize the Guard. There's the cost to the taxpayer. The number I've heard for Los Angeles is $120 million for 4,000 guardsmen for 60 days. That's a high price tag for a stopgap measure. How many police officers could have been hired, trained, and put on the streets for $120 million? There's the cost to the Department of Defense and to FEMA. Every dollar spent on a misguided use is a dollar that can't be spent on training or equipping these soldiers, that can't be spent on their real mission. A dollar that isn't there for disaster response when the next hurricane hits New Orleans or the next tornado levels St. Louis. And there's the hidden costs to the soldiers and their families. These are part-time soldiers. They have jobs at home. They have educations they are missing. They have families who rely on them, employers who rely on them. Let me speak to you from a guardsman's heart. Sunday, my pastor at the Presbyterian Church in Belleville, Illinois, spoke about trust. He was speaking to the trust between God and man. Let me speak to you of a soldier's trust. A soldier trusts fellow soldiers. They trust their leadership. They trust the political leadership of this country to send them on missions, whether wartime or peacetime, that make sense. Missions that don't waste their time or lives, that don't waste their sacrifices. A soldier's family trusts that their sacrifices, their loss of that soldier for a day, a week, a month, maybe forever, isn't a waste. Employers trust that Guardsman's mission is necessary, that it's important, that it protects our nation. Communities trust that our soldiers serve our nation, defend justice and democracy. Trust that a soldier's mission is to protect them, not police them. To misuse our troops, whether guard or active duty, is to breach those bonds of trust. When these soldiers are doing what they signed up for, defending our great nation, or helping their neighbors recover from a natural disaster, they don't mind sacrificing wages, missing a child's birthday, losing months away from school. But when they're bagging trash in Washington, D.C., they lose trust. Worse, their employers and families lose trust. It took a generation for the Guard to recover from the stain of Guardsmen shooting and killing college students at Kent State. We're one trigger pull away from another such tragedy. Don't let it happen. National Guard forces are for a real emergency, not a Band-Aid for long-standing problems that need a long-term solution. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee. My name is Gregory Pemberton. I am Chairman of the D.C. Police Union, representing roughly 3,000 officers, detectives, and sergeants in the Metropolitan Police Department. I have served this city for more than 20 years. Let me be direct. Major cities across the United States are in crisis. Crime is out of control, and police departments are dangerously understaffed. This did not happen by accident. It is the result of radical laws and rhetoric that began in Washington, D.C., the City Council stripped away officer rights, restricted proven tools, and openly celebrated defunding. The results speak for themselves. In 2020, the MPD had 3,798 sworn members. Today, we are under 3,200, the lowest in half a century, leaving us with more than 800 vacancies for the position of sworn officer. Since 2020, more than 1,600 officers have left, nearly 40% of those through resignations. These aren't retirements, these are cops walking away. The impact on public safety has been devastating. Between 2020 and 2023, homicides surged, carjackings doubled, robberies spiked, and entire neighborhoods became unsafe. Those officers who remain are working unsustainable hours, more than 1.8 million hours of overtime in 2024 alone, costing taxpayers over $130 million and burning out the force that remains. And this is not unique to Washington, D.C. Across the country, city councils and legislatures followed the same path, passing laws that hamstring police, erode morale, and expose officers to personal liability even when they do their jobs properly. The message to police was clear: you will not be supported, and the result has been predictable. Cities from New York to Chicago to Seattle are seeing record attrition, recruitment collapse, and crime that has left entire neighborhoods living in fear. This is a national problem with national consequences. This summer, the crisis reached such extremes that the President of the United States stepped in, federalizing the MPD. Alongside this action, hundreds of federal law enforcement agents were surged into the city, and the National Guard was deployed to reinforce local efforts. Their presence was immediately effective in deterring crime and stabilizing neighborhoods that had been plagued by violence. Within just 1 week of this deployment, carjackings were down 83%, robberies down 46%, violent crime down 22%, and there were 0 homicides during those 7 days, something nearly unheard of in the nation's capital. The union supports the recognition of the problem, but federal intervention cannot be permanent. The solution is not federalizing local police, it's restoring staffing, repealing failed laws, and giving officers the support they need to succeed. That is why we also support the Clean DC Act. It begins the process of undoing harmful legislation, restoring balance, and rebuilding MPD's strength. This is not just a DC issue. Other cities that embrace the same policies are now facing the same consequences. The lesson is clear. When leaders attack police, communities suffer. When lawmakers strip away tools and protections, criminals thrive. If this is not corrected, the crisis will deepen here and nationwide. I urge Congress to act, support the Clean DC Act, roll back failed legislation, and work with law enforcement instead of against us. Officers want nothing more than to protect their communities, but they cannot do it alone. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I welcome any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. Now, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and committee members for inviting me to be a part of this important hearing. I'm Greg Jackson, a survivor of gun violence, a former deputy director of the first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, the office that coordinated federal resources, implemented life-saving policies, and coordinated both state and local leaders to reach a nationwide reduction in violent crime by 13.2% and homicides by 31%. Now, first of all, in 2013, while walking home, an argument erupted across the street from me, and I was struck by a bullet. The bullet hit 2 arteries and left me bleeding to death on the pavement. And as I was fighting for my life that night, I arrived at the hospital only to be met by officers instead of doctors. They put me through 3 rounds of interrogation before surgery, and with blood pouring out, I found myself fighting for my life and my innocence. And despite spending Sundays in church, growing up with 2 loving parents, graduating from an elite college, being a hard-working professional, that night I was seen as a suspect first and a person second. This approach is of only seeing violence in our communities as a crime to solve instead of a tragedy to prevent is not only wrong, it's ineffective. Reducing violent crime requires a comprehensive approach to prevent violence before it happens, while ensuring swift and effective justice for those responsible. We know that we cannot arrest our way out of this crisis. If so, Louisiana would already be the safest state in the country, and America would be the safest country in the world. And since I was shot, nearly 1 million Americans have been shot or killed, including my mentee DeMarcos and the grandson of Mrs. Cook, with violent crime historically surging during the beginning of the first Trump administration. We know that violence is what's driving, gun violence is what's driving violent crime across our country. It's become the leading cause of death for youth in America, leading cause of death for pregnant women in our country, as well as the leading cause of death for Black men and boys, and the second leading cause of death for Black women and Latino men. And these disturbing statistics are extremely overwhelming, but the last few years we have seen real bipartisan solutions to address violent crime. With 2 consecutive years of historic reductions in gun violence, with major cities outpacing reductions across the country. And simply put, we achieved that by investing in those who are most at risk, strengthening vulnerable communities, investing in law enforcement while holding the gun industry accountable, and keeping illegal guns off of our streets. Without mass federal agents or troop deployments, we saw homicides drop 24% in Boston. Only 24 homicides, period, in Boston. 54% in Baltimore, 38% reduction in Chicago, 41% reduction in Phoenix. And we got here in part because Republicans and Democrats came together to enact a bipartisan law that provided billions of funding to prevent violence, to invest in mental health, to strengthen school safety, and to strengthen law enforcement-led strategies. including enhancing our background check system, investing in law enforcement, preventing domestic abusers from accessing guns, making the largest investment in youth and mental health, and making gun trafficking a federal crime, prosecuting over 600 traffickers. And as our communities are fighting our ways out of this crisis, we find ourselves at a dangerous crossroad. Instead of federal resources to strengthen what works, the Trump administration has dismantled and defunded bipartisan strategies passed into law to reduce violence. They shut down the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. They've defunded federal law enforcement, including the ATF. They've terminated $1 billion in mental health resources. They've terminated $812 million to community-led violence intervention programs. They defunded gun violence research in the CDC Firearm Injury Prevention Center. And they dismantled important regulations like the zero tolerance policy for gun dealers, as well as withheld $1 billion in victim services that now 24 states are suing the Trump administration for. This is not the federal support our cities need to reduce violence and end crime in our country. We need tough on crime policies which funds federal law enforcement that focus on preventing illegal guns from flooding our streets instead of just patrolling them. 95% of the guns traced to crimes in DC we know come from other states. To be tough on crime is to fund ATF to catch gun traffickers, to shut down rogue gun dealers and disrupt dangerous black markets selling illegal weapons and conversion devices to our communities. To be tough on crime is to protect and fund the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. To be tough on crime is to shut down those gun dealers who break the law and hold manufacturers accountable when they're profiting from our deaths. And frankly, to be tough on crime is to hold billionaires accountable for putting guns meant for the battlefield into our backyards every day. We have real solutions to save lives from gun violence and reduce violence crime, and now is the time to protect that progress and build on that momentum. Grandmothers should not be sitting in courts. Grandchildren should not be sitting in caskets. And Americans should not be living in fear from this crisis of gun violence when those in this chamber have the power to take action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Now, Senator Taylor.
Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and distinguished members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you about Memphis Crime Challenge. I also want to talk to you about my efforts to make Memphis matter, but in order to make Memphis matter, we have to make Memphis safe. Memphis, as you know, consistently ranks amongst America's most dangerous cities. Last year, Memphis reported 111,000 crimes, 19,000 arrests, and of those 19,000 arrests, a whopping 56% were dismissed. Violent crime has been rampant in Memphis. In 2022, Ezekiel Kelly went all over the city on a shooting spree that killed 3 people and wounded many others. That same year, Cleotha Henderson kidnapped, raped, and murdered a kindergarten school teacher by the name of Eliza Fletcher. In 2023, a St. Jude Children's Research Hospital researcher by the name of Dr. Alexander Bulikov was gunned down in front of his family. That same year, Dr. Ben Monk, a physician, was killed in his clinic by a patient. Fast forward to 2024, DeTwan Gunn was a mass shooter at a restaurant in Memphis, and he was let out on his own recognizance after that mass shooting. Jalen Lobley, who was out on bail on his own recognizance on gun charges, winds up getting into a gunfight with the Memphis Police Department that ended the life of Officer Joseph McKinney. In fact, crime is so bad in Memphis that last year, Shelby County, the county that Memphis is in, experienced the largest decrease in population of any county in the entire country. And unless we do something, Memphis will hollow out its middle class, and all that will be left are the extremely poor who can't afford to leave and the extremely wealthy who can afford private security to stay. The root of this crisis, in my view, lies in part with our Soros-backed DA, Steve Mulroy. He was elected in 2022, and he started implementing policies like a proposed diversion program for felons caught in possession of a firearm. He also does not oppose parole for first-degree murderers who are in prison trying to get out. These type of policies undermine justice in Memphis. DA Mulroy also operates his very own Innocence Project inside his office that successfully moved Michael Samples, a twice convicted murderer on death row, to life in prison. That sentence now makes him eligible for parole. Allegations of race-based prosecutions and illegal commutations have led to pending ouster resolutions before the legislature, and the Tennessee Supreme Court is now reviewing those allegations. A recent report shows that our restorative justice scheming district attorney is partnering with progressive nonprofits that encourage failed policies like decarceration and cashless bail, and they then manipulate the data into thinking that the public somehow thinks that they're safe because of these failed policies. Now, to counter this, I have championed legislation in Tennessee, such as the DA Donor Transparency Act, the DA Second Opinion Act, and we have banned the ability to pay calculator when setting bail. We have elevated the safety of the community to being a top priority when setting bail, and we passed a blended sentencing bill to deal with youthful serious offenders. I even had to pass a law that prohibits the Memphis City Council from banning routine traffic stops, an absolutely insane policy that was backed and supported by our DA. Now, federal and state efforts are working. Earlier this year, Senator Blackburn and I sat in a briefing with the FBI where they outlined Operation Viper, where they've identified 100 gangs, street gangs in Memphis. And that operation led to 500 arrests and have secured over 100 federal indictments. Just this one operation alone has reduced certain violent crimes by 25%. And I remain confident that President Trump's recently announced Memphis Safe Task Force, which includes over a dozen federal agencies, also includes the Tennessee National Guard, that they will succeed in doing the hard work necessary to infiltrate the gangs and arrest routine criminals. However, the DA remains the weak link in this operation. For those who are arrested that have to be prosecuted in state court, he remains that weak link. And to make sure that the Memphis Safe Task Force is successful, I will be sponsoring legislation in our next session that will require public certification of any cases that are reduced or not prosecuted because of from these initiatives. To maximize these efforts, I would encourage this Senate to swiftly confirm Mike Donovan as our U.S. Attorney for Western District of Tennessee, because his proven tough on crime leadership will help with prosecutions in Memphis and ensure that criminals have the consequences that are not getting under our state DA. Lastly, I would recommend the Department of Justice enter into consent decrees that will require the Shelby County District Attorney and our justice system to enforce tough on crime policies so that Memphians can maintain the right to live in their home, to travel about our city that they love, and enjoy their property. To make Memphis matter, Mr. Chairman, we have to make Memphis safe. But let's also make Memphis a model of how this Congress can turn around great American cities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Taylor. Now we'll have 5-minute rounds. Mr. Pemberton, I'm going to start with you. Critics claim the Trump administration didn't need to mobilize the National Guard in D.C. because D.C.'s crime decreased by 35% in 2024. You've suggested that statistic was falsely inflated. In the House Oversight Committee, D.C. Chairman Mendelson said that you're lying. Is the 35% statistic inflated, and what is your response to Chairman Mendelson? And then also connected with that, do you think this is a common problem with crime statistics?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Chairman. What's interesting is when Chairman Mendelson referred to me as a liar in that congressional testimony, there was public information about, one, the Internal Affairs Division at the Metropolitan Police Department had publicly announced that they were investigating command staff officials for manipulating crime data. The accusation was that they were going into police databases, changing felonies to misdemeanors to keep crime numbers down. Second of all, at that time, the House Oversight Committee had also announced that they had launched an investigation into the manipulation of crime data as well. And in their public notice of that, it stated that they had a whistleblower within the department that confirmed this pattern of practice. And thirdly, the Department of Justice, through the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., had also announced that they were investigating whether or not there were violations of the criminal code in the manipulation of crime data. So to suggest that my allegations that crime data is manipulated was somehow a lie, I believe that's belied by the facts that were already in evidence. So unfortunately, I think the irony is lost on Mr. Mendelson. But your question is, do I believe that crime data was inflated? Yes, I think that the police department, through its initial reporting, our members report to us quite often, albeit anecdotal, but I will tell you that it's ubiquitous, that when officers respond to the scene of a crime and they're investigating what they believe is a felony, that inevitably some management official will contact them either by arriving on the scene or by phone and direct them or sometimes even order them to take a report for lesser offenses, typically misdemeanors, to keep those crime stats down. In addition to that, there's obviously, as I mentioned, a number of investigations into the command staff for their manipulation of data. So yes, I think that the reporting that crime went down 35% in 2024 and then another 25% in the first 6 months of 2025, I don't think that those numbers are accurate at all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mrs. Cook, you read an impact statement at the sentencing of your grandson. Please explain what the judge said after you read your statement, and do you feel that justice was served?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. We read our impact statements. Let me tell you, Marty was so loving my family. We had at least 30 impact statements. And after we read them, she said to us, "Thank you for your impact statements." She looks over at the, I say killer. She looks over at him and she says, "Is there anything you'd like to say?" His attorney stood up and said some things, but she says to him when she asks him, "Is there anything he'd like to say?" "I know you had a stressful day after listening to all of that. Is there anything you'd like to say?" No, we did not receive justice. He was given consecutively or concurrently with the time that he was charged with guns and drugs, 10 years. Okay, so concurrently, so he had already did 4. So now how many years does that mean? That he get 5 years probation or on parole? So how many years does he actually do in jail? This is a heinous murder that he committed. He shot my grandson 7 times. He left the room and my grandson moaned. He went back in there and shot him more.
Thank you, Mrs. Cook.
Thank you.
Senator Taylor, many on the left have pushed for further gun regulation to combat violent crime. We're seeing on these soft on crime cities. What are your thoughts about gun ownership? In your opinion, are more regulations needed to keep our communities safe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I would say is that we need to remember the purpose of the Second Amendment was not about what kind of guns we can have, it was about what kind of government we can have. And what citizens in Memphis are fearful of are the guns that are on the streets by people that shouldn't have them. If you take, for example, Mr. Chairman, this picture here, this is a group of young men in a convenience store posing with long guns and handguns so that they can have a picture for social media. It's these type of pictures that I want to try to stress because they don't have these guns because we don't have enough regulations. They have these guns because they don't follow the law. And we can pass all the gun laws you want, but criminals are criminals by nature. And we've had that problem since Cain slew Abel with a rock. And we don't need to continue to put restrictions on law-abiding citizens who just simply want to protect themselves in their homes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Taylor. Now, Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pemberton, the 3,000 officers in your union, is that correct?
Yes, Senator, that's correct.
Were you involved at all in January 6th, the insurrection that took place in the Capitol?
I was not there that day. I was at work that day monitoring the situation, but no, I was not present.
Did you get a chance to either talk to any of your officers who were here or to see any videos where your officers were assaulted?
Of course, yeah. Dozens of our officers were injured, and we've spoken with all of them, yes.
Do you characterize their experience as a peaceful protest?
No, there was definitely a riot that day. Yes, sir. And officers were injured.
So what was your reaction when President Donald Trump gave a full and unconditional pardon to 1,500 individuals who had been prosecuted for violence against police officers?
Well, it's frustrating to see that, but what I point to is since that day, since January 7th, 2021 through today, we've had 1,537 officers injured where someone has assaulted a police officer, and 95% of those cases have been no-papered by the U.S. Attorney's Office. So, yes, it's frustrating to have officers who are assaulted, but the vast majority of those people that assaulted officers that day were arrested and charged, and many of them convicted.
I'm asking about the full and unconditional pardon by the president. Your reaction to that?
My reaction is that it's more frustrating to have suspects who assault police officers who are arrested by cops and have that case no-papered by a U.S. Attorney's Office than it is to have people who are convicted of crimes and spend years in jail and later be pardoned.
I guess I don't follow you. You're saying that since there were assaults aside from January 6th that were not prosecuted, you felt more strongly about that than the pardon of the president of 1,500 people who violently assaulted police officers?
What I'm saying, Senator, is more than 1,500 officers have been assaulted by people since that day, and nothing has happened to those suspects.
Would you put them in at least the same level of outrage, assaults on your officers, whether in the Capitol January 6th or afterwards?
I don't think anybody should ever be assaulting officers, and if they do, they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
And should they be full and unconditionally pardoned?
My frustration, Senator, is that no one seems to care about police officers who were assaulted after that day or before that day. It seems like people only care about police officers who were assaulted on that day in the calendar. Police officers are assaulted all the time, and no one seems to care about it, and that's our frustration.
Well, I'm certainly not in that category, and I don't think most people are, but let me tell you something else. I spent a better part of my life in this building and the U.S. Capitol building, and I think you feel as I do. It is a cathedral to democracy and should be respected, and the people that broke down the windows, came in and beat up on your police officers are despicable. And to give them a full and unconditional pardon to me and call them peaceful protesters is not conducive to saying they're sympathetic to the police and their mission. I just happen to feel that way. Mr. Jackson, you worked on a lot of projects involving state and local government as well, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
What was your experience in the previous administration?
Well, we knew that our local communities needed support. Whether we sat down with leaders in Memphis or Birmingham or Phoenix or Atlanta, the biggest request was how do we keep more guns from getting into our streets? And that's where we specifically focused on how do we invest more into ATF, both through appropriations and through White House support, so that they could have more crime gun intelligence to solve violence before it happens, to close homicides, but most importantly, to keep guns from coming into their communities. When we look at what's happening in our country, the cities that are most dangerous are those blue cities that are in red states where they don't have the regulations. Places like Tennessee where there's no concealed carry permit, there's no background check, there's no extreme risk law, there's no shoot first law, there's no secure storage law. So guns are flowing in and out of these communities that are already vulnerable to violence. And so working with state and local leaders, that's what we focused on at the federal government, is keeping guns out of communities that are most vulnerable.
And what has happened to the funding of ATF under this administration?
It's been slashed tremendously. We've seen 2/3 of even the inspectors that inspect gun stores being cut. And we know that the only entity we have that can keep guns out of our communities right now is the ATF, and it's directly under attack by this administration and frankly by the really harmful bills and budgets being proposed.
So in Chicago, we have a problem with guns coming in from neighboring states, which don't do background checks and gun shows and things of that nature. Was that a problem you ran into?
Yeah, it was huge. I mean, even in Chicago, we've seen illegal crime guns show up. In the last 10 years, those numbers have doubled. And when you look at the sources, The number of them that come from Indiana have tripled. The number from Missouri have doubled. And so what's happening is that these illegal black markets that are flowing guns into major cities like Chicago are getting more fierce. And frankly, more folks are profiting off of the deaths in our cities.
And if we slow the rate of these illegal firearms coming into this.
Gentleman's time has expired. Senator Cornyn.
Detective Pemberton, are drugs, well, let me back up. Explain what the role of drugs in the community have in terms of violence, in terms of the gangs that distribute them, that presumably engage in a lot of the violence, including attacks on police officers and other innocent parties. Where do those drugs come from?
Well, those drugs can come from anywhere, depending on what type they are. Fentanyl, marijuana, heroin, those different types of narcotics flow in the country from different means. But what it means for an area like the District of Columbia is that the entities that actually engage in the distribution of those narcotics, they protect that distribution with guns and violence. Obviously, that's a black market operation, and it's very dangerous. And rival crews and gangs are always looking to take over territory and product and cash. So it becomes a very violent endeavor for all involved, whether that's people who are trying to purchase narcotics or these folks that are selling them or the neighborhoods that it's occurring in. And then for the police to try to intervene into that operation and make arrests, it becomes very dangerous.
So are drugs the primary coin of the realm, so to speak, for street gangs that engage in this violence?
It can be one of them. It depends, but there are certainly street crews and gangs in the District of Columbia that are focused around the distribution of narcotics.
And you mentioned that the drugs could come from anywhere, but is it your belief a substantial amount of those drugs come across our southern border?
I believe that's true. It's a little bit outside of my purview, but that's my understanding from the limited information.
And then once they make their way into the United States, then the street gangs are the distribution network that take over to distribute those to the ultimate consumer, so to speak.
Once they hit an urban area like the District of Columbia, yes.
And so are you familiar with the fact that there have been several or a number of notorious attacks against immigration and customs enforcement officials? They're law officers, are they not?
That's correct, yes.
And are you familiar with the fact there have been attacks against those ICE officers?
I have seen that, yes.
We've had 4 of them in Texas alone, including a recent attack that actually ended up killing some of the detainees, presumably the people that were the shooters was trying to protect from the ICE detention and deportation proceedings. And do you believe that the defunding and the disrespect and the failure to support and honor our men and women in blue who are merely enforcing laws that are passed by Congress and other legislative bodies, do you think that's been a major cause for some attacks against law enforcement officers?
Absolutely. The rhetoric that began in 2020 about defunding the police and eliminating the police, reducing the size and scope, responsibility of police departments, replacing them with behavioral health specialists, violence interrupters, social workers, all of that nonsense was not only rhetoric, but it was also codified in law and policy. And a lot of agencies, particularly in major urban areas, are still dealing with that. Here in the District of Columbia, we have an authorized sworn strength of 4,000 sworn members. We currently have 3,180. We have more than 800 vacancies for the position of police officer. All of that can be traced back to that policy and that rhetoric. So yes, it has made this situation very unsafe and unstable.
Senator Taylor, I believe there was a comment that there were only 24 deaths in Boston during some given period of time. I'm struck by the way that people speak about the reduction in crime. We're grateful for that always, but the idea that there were only a certain number of deaths or assaults or robberies or carjackings or the like, it seems to me misses the point. Isn't the point to have as close to zero as we can possibly have? In other words, is there ever a tolerable level of violence that's acceptable in your community in Tennessee or anywhere else, in your opinion?
No, and I remind my Soros-backed DA all the time that drowning in 10 feet of water feels just like drowning in 7 feet of water. We've got to get crime down as low as we possibly can and get it manageable. And that's where this Memphis Safe Task Force will have a huge benefit, because we'll be able to bring crime down to match the decreased numbers of police officers that we have, so that when they leave, we can maintain that crime level as low as possible, but it's got to be manageable.
Thank you.
Time's expired. Senator Blumenthal, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Jackson, there are a lot of areas where we have differences and where there is controversy. But there are programs that we know actually work and where investments produce results. And that's why I am so disappointed, in fact angry, that there have been cuts in programs, $500 million in grants cut to nonprofits that provide essential federal support for a whole slew of programs that actually fight crime in our streets and neighborhoods. I've seen them in Connecticut. They stop gun violence, the drive-by shootings, the kids who now substitute guns for fists. And in your role and your experience, I would be interested in your view on whether those violence intervention programs, the community intervention, actually provide the kind of victim support and youth mentoring, the stuff that has been stopped by the Trump administration, but which we know, and in fact my Republican colleagues have agreed with us, actually do work. And I say they've agreed with us because the programs were funded through bipartisan agreement just a few years ago. The administration got $2 million from the Alliance of Concerned Men, an organization founded by formerly incarcerated men that seeks to break cycles of violence by reaching out and mentoring. They cut $2 million in funding for the Circle of Brotherhood, an organization of community violence intervention. I'm not saying every one of these is the gold standard, but there are programs that work. And if you throw all of them out, you forego, in my view, a real opportunity to fight crime. And that's not even counting the burn grant funding cuts that go to police. If the administration is serious about crime, it ought to be increasing those grants to local police, not cutting them. What are your views?
Well, you know, there have been countless research done on violence intervention and victim service organizations, and we've seen that they've had tremendous success to reduce violence by upwards of 50%. And frankly, these organizations across the country are also applauded by the community. Mr. Pemberton called them nonsense. But we had at the White House, we brought the top 10 chiefs of the top 10 major cities in the country and the top sheriffs across the country, and every one of them applauded community members and nonprofits that are supporting families that suffer loss, like Mrs. Cook, that are working with those who are most at risk to prevent violence before it happens. And frankly, they're seeing results. In all of our communities where violence intervention ecosystems are strongest, we are seeing the strongest reductions. And I'll tell you, there's not one police chief or sheriff in this country that I know will stand up and say that we don't want the community support and partnership to keep our community safer.
I think anybody, and all of us, or quite a few of us, have been involved in law enforcement. You know you can't do it effectively without resources. And Senator Durbin was asking you about the cuts in funding for AT and F. I worked with AT and F when I was U.S. Attorney. They're among the underappreciated of our law enforcement agencies. Some of the others get a lot of attention, a lot of publicity, a lot of glamour, but we're talking about trafficking and smuggling and guns particularly. Tell me what resource cuts have meant to AT and F.
Look, we've seen tremendous resource cuts. I think some of the most devastating is the cut to inspectors that can make sure we're cracking down on gun dealers that we know are violating the law. We know that ATF was huge. We were able to shut down 350 websites that were selling Glock switches. We were able to shut down 400 gun stores that were violating the law. We prosecuted over 600 gun traffickers that were bringing guns into vulnerable communities like Memphis, like Birmingham, and those provided real results of keeping guns off our streets. And if you don't think that's important, then just listen to the testimony of Kash Patel, who bragged about how many guns they were able to get off their streets. They know that the way we make our communities safer is keeping guns out of our communities, and the ATF is our strongest tool to do so.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Mr. Pemberton, your name was called. Would you like to respond?
Yes, Mr. Jackson mentioned violence interrupters and the efficacy, but here in the District of Columbia, there's almost no evidence of any efficacy of these violence interrupters. And as a matter of fact, one of our city council members has been indicted for accepting bribes from a violence interruption organization. And I can name at least a half a dozen suspects who have been arrested for murder, gun charges, drug charges, other violence charges, who have been paid by violence interruption organizations. This violence interruption in the District of Columbia is a grift, and it is a way for tax dollars to get funneled into the hands of criminals. We shouldn't be spending a dime on violence interruption in the District of Columbia. There is absolutely zero proof that it works or that it has any level of efficacy whatsoever.
Well, I might just say I can't speak to the District of Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. Before I turn to Senator Schmidt, I want to encourage those that are worried about grant cuts to take a look at what the Biden administration actually spent the money on. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars to prove, and I quote from them, gender-affirming medical care, end quote. Over $500,000 on a podcast series, blog, and academic conference preparation. And the list of this goes on and on. I'd like to enter into the record Chairman Grassley's staff report exposing the disastrous consequences of the Biden Department of Justice grants to the Soros-backed Vera Institute, and they used taxpayer funds to gain access to progressive prosecutors just like Memphis DA, who ran on a platform of cashless bail and increasing the age of accountability for crimes. Without objection, I'll enter into the record. Senator Schmidt, you're recognized.
Thank you.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Pemberton, I thank you for your service. I just want to ask you, could you just walk through, because the numbers don't lie. In the District of Columbia, there's been a reduction of 53% in homicides, 57% in robberies, 75% in carjackings. What lessons can be learned sort of at scale in D.C. and places like Kansas City, for example, that has a high crime rate and a sort of a apologist mayor and a prosecutor that doesn't want to prosecute violent criminals?
That's an excellent point. And what our organization has been shouting for the past 5 years, since I mentioned the rhetoric and the policy changed back in 2020, is that you need to have the proper number of police officers, and they need to be able to have the tools and resources to go out into these communities and do their job professionally, responsibly, constitutionally. And if you do that, and you have a prosecutor that backs those officers, like we now do here in the District of Columbia, guess what? You can reduce crime in 7 days. That's what we saw in the District of Columbia. We saw federal agents surge in. We saw the National Guard taking posts in these neighborhoods. And we saw a prosecutor who took all of our arrests seriously. And within the first week, there was a remarkable night and day difference.
And a morale boost, I'm sure, for your officers too, right? When there's actually a police presence and prosecutions. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I also want to, Mr. Jackson, you're listed as the former Deputy Director of the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, but you previously served as the Executive Director of the Community Justice Action Fund and now serve as the organization's Executive Advisor. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you were the Executive Director until 2023, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to just read some past statements from the Community Justice Action Fund. I'm just going to refer to as CJAF. In 2019, an op-ed, CJAF founder and another senior advisor stated the following, quote, "It is this critical moment. We're finally saying firmly that we must divest in policing," end quote. In 2020 letter, CJAF stated, "We must divest from aggressive policing." further stated public health approaches must be prioritized over policing to end gun violence, and that a, quote, an anti-racist approach must always be a part of policymaking and advocacy on gun violence prevention. We all know what happened. Those were statements in 2019 and 2020. We all know what happened in the summer of love of 2020, where you had record high violent crime rates, including gun crimes, and gutted police departments. Does CJAF still support divesting and defunding policing?
Community justice supports a public health approach to gun violence and recognizes that law enforcement is an important part of that ecosystem. And I will note, as Deputy Director, we invested $42 billion into public safety, made some of the largest investments in law enforcement in American history. And this administration and this Republican leadership is actually proposing and making the largest defunding of law enforcement in American history to date.
But you don't deny that the organization said that we must divest in policing.
I can't speak to an op-ed before I was there.
Okay.
So.
Okay. In 2019, CJAF also said that every legislator that openly calls for mass deportations is enabling a mass radicalization of white individuals that are now emboldened to commit murder. Does CJAF stand by that statement?
I can't speak to that statement.
Do you believe that?
Can you reframe this?
Sure. That any legislator that openly calls for mass deportations is enabling a, quote, mass radicalization of white individuals that are now emboldened to commit murder.
I can't stand with a statement I didn't write, and I don't quite understand.
But do you agree with that?
I don't quite understand what you're
I just read you a statement. I'm asking you, do you agree with that statement or not?
No, I don't agree with that statement.
Thank you. CJAF also identified ICE as pushing a white nationalist agenda. Quote, this white nationalist agenda is used by the deportation force of ICE in CBP to lock up black and brown immigrants across the country. It lives through the courts and police departments that lock up and kill black and brown bodies. Does CJAF stand by that statement?
I can't speak to that.
Do you believe that that's true?
What is your reference to this?
This is a quote. This is a CJF identified in that same letter that I referenced earlier in 2020 that effectively ICE was a white nationalist organization that was trying to lock up and kill black and brown bodies.
Well, again, I can't speak to something that was written before.
Do you believe that?
Again, I can't speak to that statement.
So you agree with that or you don't agree with that statement? Do you think ICE's mission is white nationalist in nature and its intention is to kill black and brown people?
No.
Okay. It condemned calling for deportations. I'm out of time. I just would point out that this organization that you're advisor of is part of the Tides Network, which is directly affiliated with George Soros and has gotten funding from USAID. So if you want to understand why people are so committed to making sure USAID doesn't fund these radical organizations, some of these statements are exhibits A, B, C, D through Z. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Booker, you're recognized.
So I've been in the Senate now over 12 years. I've just never seen a hearing like this on a committee that has a track record for working together. Blue City chaos and tragedy, how the Trump administration is addressing human costs of soft crime policies. Dear God, we continue in this nation to deepen partisan divide and to undermine the truth that we share common cause, common purpose, and even common sense. In a bipartisan way, we have worked year after year to invest in the resources that keep our communities safe. And now I'm sitting in a hearing that somehow wants to pit red against blue as if they're not Republicans and Democrats that live in every county and every state. And all of us want the same thing, which is lower crime in our communities. I may be the person in this committee that has made a decision in my life about 25, 30 years ago to move into a very high crime neighborhood. I have friends that have died by gun violence. Mentees of mine have died by gun violence. And I'm telling you right now, pitting us against each other in this false fight narrative that we don't share that common urgency and can't find common ground. This committee right now is having a hearing that is not about finding common ground and working to find solutions, but driving a false divide based upon a false pretext that somehow places that vote for one party over another are more dangerous, and that's just not true. The murder rate, this is truth data, the murder rate in states that voted for Donald Trump have actually exceeded the murder rate in the states that voted for Kamala Harris, and every year from 2000 to 2023. Over the course of this century, the average murder rate in Trump voting states is 50% higher than in Harris voting states. Do we really want to talk about crime in that manner? Since 2000, the top 10 murder rate states have been dominated and reliably places that have voted for Republicans. The red state murder rate was 33% higher than the blue state murder rate in 2021 and 2022. 2022 was the 23rd consecutive year that murder-plagued states that voted for the president in this past election have higher rates. 8 out of 10 states that had the highest murder rate in 2022 voted for. I could go on and on and on. This is not constructive to the work we have to do. Anybody who's had the tragedy of losing people they love don't care about our partisan fights. They care about us finding solutions. And we have done that on this committee before. Donald Trump signed the First Step Act into law. Joe Biden increased COPS grants higher than any other president in the modern era. I am so exhausted by hearings like this that are far more about posturing to our political divide than trying to create common ground. Let me tell you about common ground. I've worked with some of my colleagues across the aisle to do things like surge funding. Last Congress, me and Republican colleagues on this committee introduced legislation that would establish more resources for law enforcement agencies to hire, retain, and train detectives to deal with what is a national problem, which is homicide clearance rates. There are evidence-based strategies that will keep us safer. A hearing about blue states and red states is a fiction that is being driven in this country, that somehow we have this tribalistic fight that is causing our problems, and that's not it. In fact, that is the problem. That we in this country have not understood that we belong to each other, that we share common ground, that we have common values, and that there are strategies that we could be pursuing as opposed to fighting each other. The kind of partisanship that's toxic in this nation is what we saw in the president's first act. To take criminals who beat police officers, criminals who beat them so savagely, people like Brian Sicknick died, and then to pardon those police officers for particularly partisan reasons. That's unjustifiable and something that should bring us all together. The pretext for this hearing is a farce. It's belied by the evidence, it's belied by common sense, and doesn't get this committee back to the work that I've seen done constructively in Congress after Congress, despite who's president and who's in the majority. We in this committee have done the work together to make our country safer. We are seeing crime going down, but that's little satisfaction to people who have seen their families victimized by crime. We have work to do, but this ain't it.
I recognize myself for 5 minutes, and Ms. Cook, we are sorry for your loss. And thank you for being here today. Thank each of you for being here. We are doing something about crime in Tennessee, and Senator Taylor, I do want to come to you. We had phase 1 in Memphis this summer with the FBI and Operation Viper that was very successful, 500 plus arrests, over 100 federal indictments, and you have mentioned the Soros-funded DA that has been a stumbling block, as well as the juvenile court system that has been a stumbling block to addressing the crime situation. Now, phase 2 is in place, and this is the combination of the federal agencies, a dozen agencies, plus state resources with Tennessee Highway Patrol, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and the National Guard. I want you to talk for a moment about the impact that federal resourcing has had and how it helps Memphis. They are 500 police officers short. So let's talk about the impact that is there, and also I want to touch on cashless bail and bail laws with you.
Thank you. The impact that Operation Viper has had already has been huge. As you mentioned, 500 arrests, over 100 federal indictments. My concern is that not all of those arrests will end with federal prosecutions. Many of those arrests will be deferred to the state for prosecution, which would be our local district attorney. And my concern is, as I said in my opening statement, he is the weak link in all of this, because the cases that get referred to state court, as soon as the federal agencies leave and the National Guard leaves and the THP officers leave, he will drag around and dismiss the cases, just like he has done in other cases. There are other cases that he has dismissed. One is there's a federal judge who had an intern who someone attempted to take his life, and that case has been dismissed. And there was an interstate shooting of a constituent of mine who called me, and the case drug on, and it was ultimately dismissed. So his MO is to drag this out so that everybody leaves, the spotlight's off, and then he goes about dismissing and degrading or downgrading the cases. And that will be the weak link in all of this effort with the Make Memphis task force.
And the DA that you're referring to, Mulroy, actually took office in 2022, and during his campaign, he stated, and I'm going to quote him, his quote was, he would avoid cash bail, end quote. And he also stated that he wanted to, and I quote again, transform the criminal justice system, end quote, in Memphis. And certainly he has done that. And we have put a lot of energy into federal support and state support to make certain that Memphis is going to be safe. But it appears what we have is social justice activists who are trying to impede that progress. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. And he has a merry band of restorative justice schemers that are going about trying to make Memphis look like a Mad Max movie, except the cars and the music aren't as good.
Let me come to you for just a moment on cargo theft. Senator Klobuchar and I are working on legislation, and it is the Cargo Security Innovation Act. Now, we know Memphis is America's distribution center. With the Port of Memphis, all 5 Class A railroads, FedEx, and I-40 that goes from the East Coast to the West Coast. And this status as a logistics hub has drawn these cartels and gangs and organized crime rings to Memphis, and they're attacking our supply chains. And I want you to speak for just a moment about cargo theft in the area and why it's important to Memphis.
Right, thank you. As you mentioned, cargo theft is incredibly important to Memphis. We are the home of FedEx. All those railroads that you mentioned come through here. We have the Mississippi River. We have the world's, the second largest cargo airport in the world is in Memphis. So we have the 4 R's, river, roads, railway, and runway. And you reported or the Memphis police reported that cargo thefts are down in Memphis, and you pushed back on that. And when I checked into that, not all incidents of cargo theft are reported to the same agency.
Right.
So many times they may be reported to the railroad police or to other state and federal agencies. So the Memphis Police Department may not know that there has been cargo theft.
Right.
Or that a particular agency is investigating it. But what's happening now is the railroad companies are having to take actions themselves. One railroad company, they move their intermodal yard to a nearby county so they don't have to stop in Memphis. The railroads are now coordinating their time through the switches so that they don't have to stop in Memphis. And so they're doing everything they can. We need your bill passed. I have a bill at the state level that will help deal with cargo theft.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to thank all of you for appearing today. Ms. Cook, I'm so sorry for your loss, and thank you for being here. I'm a former prosecutor. I've spent a lot of time since I got here trying to focus on some of the issues that as Senator Blackburn just discussed with cargo that we think could be helpful, but also on helping to fund local police. I think that's a lot of the answer here. And my state has had its share of tragedies this summer. First, the assassination of my friend Melissa Hortman and her husband, and then, of course, Annunciation Church, where these kids were gunned down during Mass through stained glass window. And I do want to mention from a law enforcement standpoint that despite being strapped, the Minneapolis police, it was an incredible story. The first officer was there 3.5 minutes after the first 911 call. And within 14 minutes of that call, 20 people were in the ambulance. They were all tourniquets, everything. They were off to the hospital, and that's how so many lives were saved despite losing both Fletcher and Harper, these two adorable children. We saw the same thing, of course, in Michigan this weekend. And so that leads me to a few answers here. One is how we support local law enforcement. Mr. Pemberton, if you want to talk about local law enforcement funding and better equipment and anything that we can do on a local basis for the local police. To me, that's part of the answer here.
Funding is critical. Obviously, as I said in my testimony, and as I've been saying throughout this hearing, the staffing levels are paramount, and we have to find a way to get those staffing levels back to where they need to be. But outside of that, particularly in the District of Columbia, our facilities are just in deplorable condition. The stations are they need tons of work. The locker rooms are moldy. The bathrooms are non-functional. The parking lots are not in good shape. We need more vehicles. We need more take-home vehicles. We need more ballistic armor. There are all kinds of things we can do to make sure that our members are properly staffed, that they have clean and healthy facilities, and that they have the proper training to go out and do their job.
And do you think that would help with retirement, there's too much retirement, recruitment and retaining when it comes to officers, and what else do you think would be helpful? Of course, we face this with the Capitol Police. Then Senator Blunt and I worked really hard, and now Senator Padilla's the ranking member on the Rules Committee. But we worked hard to pass some legislation to help with benefits and salaries and the like. Could you address retention and hiring of police officers?
Yeah, obviously it's competitive now because there are significantly fewer people applying for the job of police officer than there were, say, 5 or 6 years ago. And so all of these agencies are now competing for the same smaller pool of candidates. It's much harder to get them in the door. So anything we can do to deal with salaries and benefits and retirement packages, that's paramount. But as you mentioned before, also having these facilities that are top-notch and having the proper tools, that's also a big deal.
And that would include unfreezing federal funding or getting federal funding to local police departments?
Absolutely, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jackson, I come from a state strong tradition of hunting, and when I look at all of these proposals, when it comes to firearms, assault weapons, I think, does this hurt my Uncle Dick and his deer stand? And whenever I get on one of these pieces of legislation or lead one of them, my answer is no. I had a discussion last week with Director Patel about assault weapon bans and what we could do. Could you talk a little bit about that and not our discussion, but just if it could be one of the things I raised to him, I'm in favor of assault weapon ban. I'm in favor of more background checks. I think there's a number of things we could do here when it comes to these assault weapons getting in the hands of people that shouldn't have them. One first step would be to get the age up to 21. Both in Uvalde and Buffalo, the shooters got their guns the minute they turned 18. And that 21 age is the same age that already applies to purchasing handguns from federally licensed dealers. Talk about that and how that could be helpful as some kind of I don't want to use the word compromise when we're dealing with little kids being gunned down in a church and 12-year-olds trying to protect 6-year-olds. But talk about that as one solution in addition to, of course, background checks, assault weapon ban in general.
Yeah, I think that's a really important step to make sure we keep guns out of the hands of our youth. One of the witnesses earlier showed a picture of young men with firearms in Tennessee, and there's no minimum age to purchase there. And that's a big issue. And so we can't just demonize some youth and celebrate others for buying guns at such a young age, recognizing that gun violence is the #1 cause of death and youth in our country. And I also will say, even before we go there, there's a lot more low-hanging fruit. We can crack down on machine gun conversion devices and Glock switches, all of which we know is fueling the deaths that we're seeing across the country. And this Trump administration has already, through the Department of Justice, pulled back on just implementing laws and actually enforcing laws to keep machine gun conversion devices out of their hands. And so I think we can at least focus on enforcing the laws on the books to start to keep guns out of the hands of those in crisis while we look for more solutions for our youth.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. And Senator Britt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate all of you being here today to discuss this important topic. Look, let's be clear. The problem that we're facing today was created by blue cities, was created by plans coming from the other side of the aisle, whether it's cashless bail policies, downgrading classifications of whole categories of crimes, undermining rights and protections afforded by law enforcement officers like we saw in D.C. in 2022, which Detective Pemberton, I want to talk to you about that, or creating systems to ensure that pretrial releases of even the most violent offenders, like what happened in Memphis, were done. So when we're looking at this, I take issue with what the ranking member had to say. He specifically pointed out Alabama. Truth be told, 8% of our population in Birmingham and Montgomery accounts for 40% of our crime. Both of those cities have been run by Democratic mayors, and in particular in Birmingham for the last 50 years. The mayor has been a Democrat. So we can't pick and choose here and pretend like that is a whole state problem. We're talking about specific areas, and we want to keep these people safe. Here's the deal. Why can't we all agree that, Mrs. Cook, your grandson never deserved to die? Your grandson should still be with us today. And we need to utilize every tool in our toolbox to make sure that that is the reality for another grandmother somewhere in DC or wherever across this country. And you said today that when you told your story that no one heard you. You said you showed up in the mayor's office. You said that you led movements and you tried to gather people to bring attention to this. You asked for answers, and for months and months and months and months, nobody would give you any. Nobody felt like that your grandson was worthy of finding who killed him and shooting him, what you said, 7 times, and holding them accountable. You said today, for the very first time, you feel heard. Can you talk to me about what it means with President Trump placing emphasis on keeping our communities safe, what it means to someone like you who has lost someone, your very firstborn grandson, so near and dear to your heart?
Yes, I can. Hello. Yes, I can, and thank you for that. As I said, I'm a Washingtonian. I'm 69 years old. I grew up in Washington. I know it well. I went to school there, so I know crime in our city. And I know that the laws and the legislators and a lot of things need to be changed to combat it. If we don't send the killer message, then they're going to keep killing. If you're only going to give me a slap on the wrist and you're going to let me out, then when I got that vacation, 3 hots in a cot for a little while, got some rest, I come back out and I do the same thing. I have not learned. There's no reform in there. And when it comes time to my grandson, and I'm living with that, and he only gets maybe 10 years, he shot my grandson, not 7 times, sweetie, 8. And then he took his body and threw it on the side of Suitland Parkway. And we had to look for my grandson. When we got back bones. It took us 9 months to find his remains, and we had to find his remains. We had to solve the case. We had to do the investigation. DC has had money to be able to do things like this until now. When someone is standing up and talking about it, then we want to raise our heads and say we want to do something. Something could have been done a long time ago.
Thank you. Thank you for raising your voice. I appreciate it. Detective Pemberton, you obviously are well aware of DC's 2022 Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act and the impact it had on the MPD. I am proud to have voted to repeal this law in the past, and I was really proud to recently have co-sponsored Senator Cruz's bill to repeal it. The passage of that law is one of the many things that I think members of the DC City Council have taken to demonstrate their lack of concern for public safety and general unseriousness about the issues in front of us. Look, I'm sure you're going to have an opportunity to talk more about that law, which I look forward to hearing, and if not, I'll follow up with some written questions. But from your experience, when you have elected leaders that undermine law enforcement, that don't seem to be standing shoulder to shoulder with law enforcement, that seem to be not having their back. Can you tell me what that does on morale and what it does for recruitment and retention of law enforcement officers?
Yes, ma'am. And I can. It is absolutely unquantifiably the worst piece of public safety legislation that I have ever seen. And I can tell you exactly what it did. It took us from nearly 4,000 police officers to 3,200 police officers in 5 years. We went from 30,000 arrests per year to 15,000 arrests per year. It created liabilities for police officers for administrative, civil, and criminal penalties, even when they do their job properly. And we have seen that enacted on them. And it also, additionally, it made it so it's impossible to hold criminals accountable, even when they're convicted of violent crimes. It has absolutely destroyed the police department in ways that I certainly don't have time to get into, but it is absolutely the most important piece of legislation to our members and to the nation's capital.
Thank you, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by also offering my condolences to Ms. Cook, as not just as a senator, but as a parent. My heart goes out to you, and we feel you, and appreciate you being here today. But I also want to ask the committee to kind of just take a step back and recall what the theme and supposed focus is of this hearing today, because as I've been monitoring, I can't help but take away the false political narrative that blames crime in America on so-called, quote, blue cities, while conveniently ignoring some facts. Because the truth is that Republican-led states have had murder rates 50% higher than Democratic-led states for decades. Look at the stats in Mississippi. Look at the stats in Alabama. Look at the stats in Louisiana. Yet we don't hear President Trump calling for the deployment of National Guard troops or the Marines or any federal agents into Jackson or Baton Rouge. Instead, the Trump administration has chosen to target cities like Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., and Portland, and they're threatening others, not because these cities were uniquely unsafe, but because their residents had the audacity to vote for a candidate for president other than Donald Trump. Now, in my home state of California, I can cite example after example of how we've invested at the state and local level, not just in police, yes, that's important, but also in crime prevention strategies, community-based policing strategies, mental health programs, gun safety initiatives. And those investments work when taken together. Los Angeles saw a 27% drop in homicides thanks to these strategies. That's what real smart public safety efforts look like. But by contrast, let's look again at what we've done here at the federal level. The Republican majority in Congress has supported cutting funding for the ATF by $400 million. Cutting funding, not augmenting ATF resources. They've rescinded over $1 billion in mental health and school safety funding, and even shut down the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And at the same time, they've weakened background checks and effectively legalized machine guns by allowing certain weapons to bypass federal bans. Meanwhile, they're diverting resources away from counterterrorism and child exploitation cases and efforts to combat drug trafficking. And this committee has a responsibility to call out these facts. And as members of this committee, we must also defend the Constitution against executive overreach. Deploying federal troops and masked agents into American cities without lawful basis is not just a policy disagreement. It's a fundamental threat to democratic norms and the separation of powers between states and the federal government. My first question, General Enyart, as someone who commanded the Illinois National Guard, how do you view the danger of using Guard units or even active duty service members in cities like Los Angeles and Portland and Washington, D.C. for local law enforcement efforts?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Senator. Well, as a commander of National Guard forces, former commander of National Guard forces, you need to understand that National Guard forces are not trained law enforcement officers. We may have a few police officers in our ranks who just happen to be cops in civilian life, but the vast majority of National Guardsmen are, and for that matter, the active duty forces, are not police officers. And MP units are trained in military response, military law, not civilian law enforcement. So it is a hazard.
Given that, what risk do we face if the executive branch normalizes or the Republican majority in Congress allows the executive branch to normalize unilateral use of troops in American cities?
Well, there's clearly going to be a disconnect between American citizenry and the American military. The American military is designed to protect us from foreign enemies. It's designed to protect us, not to police our streets. That's what civilian law enforcement's for, and there are plenty of federal law enforcement agencies that can provide that response.
Thank you. And one last question. I know my time is running out quickly here. Having learned from this experience in Los Angeles, which was clearly the test case for this administration, I have a concern about our national readiness. From a readiness standpoint, what does it mean when military resources are diverted from national defense and disaster response to conduct police civilian activities?
Every dollar that you take away from or that you spend on a misuse of military force is a dollar that you don't have available for national defense, a dollar you don't have available to respond to the next Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans or the next Mississippi River flood or the next tornado in St. Louis. So it's spending resources that need to be allocated to where they're properly allocated, and that's to the defense of our great nation and to recovery from national disasters.
Thank you. And just a final comment in closing. That's you pointed out some key examples from a Guards member perspective. Separate and apart from the Department of Defense, right? When Marines were deployed into Los Angeles, it took those Marines away from other critical missions imperative for our national security. So it's not just local communities, whether they're feeling safer or not, but whether we as a nation are more secure or not. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it's clear from this hearing the Democrat talking points have come out. Both Senator Padilla and Senator Booker spent a great deal of time talking about, quote, red states. There's a reason they were talking about red states, because unfortunately most red states have blue cities, and that's where the crime is. If you want to look at in 2023, the large cities with the most homicides per 100,000 people, number one was New Orleans, Louisiana. Number two was Memphis, Tennessee. Number three was St. Louis City. Number four was Baltimore City. Number five was Washington, D.C. Democrat crime policies kill people. Soros DAs who let murderers out of jail kill people. When you don't prosecute violent criminals, innocent victims die. Right here in Washington, D.C., in 2012, murders in D.C. totaled fewer than 100. By 2023, murders had nearly tripled, 274 lives taken in a single year. These are the real-world consequences of Democrat crime policies that let murderers go. It is very simple cause and effect. If you release murderers onto the street, they will kill people, and they do it all across the country. And we need to understand these are not just numbers. Here are some of the faces behind those numbers. Edward Korestein, 19, brutally assaulted during a carjacking attempt in D.C. Eric Tarpinian Jackham, 21, a young congressional intern gunned down in the capital city. Honesty Cheadle, 3 years old, just a toddler, killed by stray gunfire. Sarah Lynn Milgram, 26, and Yaron Lachinsky, 30, Israeli embassy staffers newly in love on the verge of engagement brutally murdered. Mike Gill, 56, a husband, father of 3. Former Trump administration official shot in cold blood during a D.C. carjacking rampage. These aren't just names. These are sons and daughters, husbands and wives, parents and grandchildren. Mrs. Cook, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing the unbelievable pain and loss that you have endured through the loss of your grandson. I'm sorry that happened. Your grandson should have been protected. The city should have protected your grandson. He should still be alive. And tragically, this pattern keeps on happening. Now, Senator Booker also said we should have bipartisan agreement. I think that's a great idea. We should have bipartisan agreement. How about we all come together and say, let's stop murders? How about we all come together and say, let's stop rape? How about we all come together and say, let's stop attacking pedophiles? I want you to look at what happened when the National Guard went to D.C. Robbery fell by 57%. Homicide fell by 58%. Sex abuse fell by 40%. Those are real results. And Detective Pemberton, if you would tell this committee what was the effect of the 2022 Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Law, and what would the benefit be for the people of D.C. if Congress passes my Clean D.C. Act?
Thank you, Senator Cruz, and thank you for introducing the Clean D.C. Act, which repeals the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act. It is unquestionably one of the worst pieces of legislation, public safety legislation I've ever seen, and it has completely dismantled and destroyed the Metropolitan Police Department to the tune of more than 800 police officers short. It has eliminated their bargaining rights. It has eliminated their due process rights. It has changed the use of force policy so that facts unknown to officers can be used against them in charging them criminally. It exposes all of their personnel records to public databases. I could go on and on. It is an 86-page bill. Each subtitle in that bill is worse than the last, and it was designed to defund and destroy the police department. It was designed to hamstring police officers and make sure that criminals, even when convicted, would be protected from being held accountable. Repealing that bill is everything. It is the alpha and the omega of fixing criminal justice in the District of Columbia, and we must repeal that as soon as possible. This is what we have been shouting from the rooftops for 5 years. We knew it when we saw the language in the bill that it was going to be devastating. No one would listen to us. And thankfully now, thanks to your bill and Congressman Clyde's bill on the House side, we can actually get this bill repealed so we can get back to fixing the police department and bringing crime down permanently in the nation's capital.
And Detective Pemberton, you're the head of the D.C. Police Officers Union.
Yes, sir.
In your judgment, passing the Clean D.C. Act would make Washington, D.C. safer, would reduce murders, would reduce violent crime?
Permanently, yes, sir.
And I would point out again, Senator Booker, and it seems none of the Democrats are here now, Senator Booker said we should be bipartisan. I can think of few issues that are more natural for bipartisanship than stopping crime. It used to be the case. You know, this committee used to work together when it came to violent crime. It's only been in the last few years that elected Democrats have decided that releasing violent criminals is something to be celebrated. Earlier, Mr. Taylor made reference to Soros DAs. George Soros has spent millions of dollars electing DAs all over the country who turn around and let violent criminals go. The Democrat Party unleashed the crazy with the Abolish the Police movement. And the Abolish the Police movement wasn't just in the abstract. Cities all across the country slashed funding for police. Minneapolis slashed the funding for police. The NYPD cut its funding over $1 billion. Sadly, Austin, Texas cut the funding for its police $150 million. When you take police off the streets, people die. There's a direct cause and effect, but there are two ways to abolish the police. One is going after the police themselves, which Democrats have decided that is their party position. But the second way you abolish the police is you put in place Soros DAs who just won't charge anyone. That means the police cannot do their job because when they arrest a murderer, a Soros DA turns around and lets them go. When they arrest a carjacker, a Soros DA turns around and lets them go. And for the life of me, I do not understand why Democrats are not celebrating the reduction in crime. Go back to the reduction in crime in D.C. that we've seen with the guard on the ground. You should be cheering a 57% decrease in crime, robbery, a 58% decrease in homicide. There are people in D.C. alive because the guard is there, and not a single Democrat is saying, that's good. Not a single Democrat is saying, we're glad those people are alive. Instead, they're saying, take them off the street and let the murderers run free.
Senator,
that's not serving anybody.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Just a second, Senator Hawley. Now with the clock's right, go ahead.
Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Ms. Cook, I want to say thank you especially to you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for telling your story. And I'm sorry for what you and your family have had to endure. And it's powerful to have you here today. Thank you very much. I want to talk about some of these policies that have gotten to where we are today. Mr. Jackson, if I could just start with you. You were Deputy Director in the Biden White House for gun violence and a special assistant to the president. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You're also affiliated with the Community Justice Action Fund. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm also a survivor of gun violence.
You were their executive director. When was that, the Community Justice Action Fund?
2021 to 2023.
And you're affiliated with them now?
Yes, as executive advisor.
Okay. The Community Justice Action Fund is, do you disclose your donors?
Yes.
All of the donors are public?
Yes.
You're funded by the Tides Advocacy Group, among others?
They're a fiscal sponsor.
This is, right.
They
That would
handle
be a donor.
our HR.
Yeah. This is a George Soros funded group?
No.
He's one of the donors?
No.
He's a donor to the Tides Advocacy Group.
Yeah, that's our fiscal sponsor. So they handle our HR, our back office, our operations.
Great. Okay. Great. So in other words, I mean,
we're one of 300 organizations.
Right, that they run. You are a subset
we
of them.
pay them to be a fiscal
Well,
sponsor.
you are a subset of that organization, which he helps to fund, right? Okay. All right. Just wanted to get a level set here. So I want to ask you about some of the policies that you've advocated because they're exactly what we see implemented in these blue cities, like defunding the police.
No.
Oh, indeed.
That's not. We advocate for
Wait, I haven't asked a question yet. We'll get to. I've got a lot of questions. Believe me, and I'll give you time. So let's talk about this report that you issued when you were executive director, a Policymaker's Playbook. And I'll ask you to enter it into the record, Mr. Chairman. Great.
Without objection.
Thank you. In this report, you advocate, and I quote now, defunding the police because the long-term goal is fundamentally to reimagine how the state serves its citizens in the project of public safety. You go on to say police departments traumatize residents through a destructive cycle of racist over-policing, and the answer is not to add any more money to police budgets. Talk to me about, why is it that denying policing to the most vulnerable communities is a solution? I know that's what the blue cities are doing, but why is that a good idea?
Well, look, I in no way stand with defunding law enforcement.
That's what your report says.
Sheriff Mike Sheridan, who taught me how to drive when I was 16 years old.
Wait. Your report, when you were executive director, said you wanted to defund the police. Do you renounce this report? Mr. Jackson, do you renounce the report that you authored as executive director? Here it is.
You're the second senator to bring up an op-ed
This isn't an op-ed. This is your report, a Policymaker's Playbook to reduce gun violence without policing communities.
Okay.
Community Justice Action Fund, copyright 2023, when you were executive director. Now you say you don't know anything about it. Now you say that you haven't heard of it, just like the Democrats who all of a sudden say, oh, we're all for the police. They've been advocating defunding them for years.
Okay, well, you can look at documents or you can look at results.
My question is, do you renounce this report now? You say you no longer agree with this.
And my answer is that I led the efforts to invest $42 billion in law enforcement.
You've advocated defunding the police as executive director of an organization that you still lead and are affiliated with.
Never see me advocate for that directly. What you see me advocate for
is
a comprehensive approach to reducing violence.
Right. The comprehensive approach is defunding the police, which is what this says
the entire time.
This is so typical of what the Democrats do now. After your policies have transparently failed and led to the deaths of millions of Americans, now you say you've never heard of defunding the police. Your own report recommends it on page after page after page. Let me ask about something else you say. Here's what you say we ought to invest in. Instead of funding the police, here's what we ought to invest in. We need to invest in programs that acknowledge the need for safe space initiatives led by lesbian, gay, bisexual, two-spirit, trans, and gender nonconforming people. What's two-spirit?
Well, look, I don't know exactly. You guys are pulling some interesting quotes.
This is from your report.
If you look at the report, the focus is on investing in violence intervention, outreach workers.
What is you say that you shouldn't invest in the police, but we ought to invest in two-spirit community programs that acknowledge two-spirit individuals.
We are not going to discriminate
what is that?
We're not going to discriminate against any nonprofit that
what
wants
is
to
a
help us
two-spirit?
prevent violence in
What
our
is
community.
two-spirit? You say don't fund the police, but do fund programs that create safe spaces for two-spirit people. What is? I just want to know. I don't know what that is. I have no idea what that is.
Well, I honestly, I'm not completely aware of the language or
You
the
wrote
spirit
the
of how that was
report?
written. But what I'm telling you is that what is
a two-spirit individual? I mean, really, this is your policymaker's playbook. You are the witness called by the Democrats on this committee, so I assume you reflect their views. Well, you don't want to fund the police. You want to fund safe spaces for two-spirit individuals. What is a two-spirit person?
I feel like I'm looking at a two-faced individual because you talk about reducing
Oh, no, sir.
violence.
You're looking at somebody who's
You're also
reading you your
speaking out
own
against
words, and I'd like to hear an
violence
answer.
programs.
Here's the answer. The answer is you don't have any solutions. You want to invest in gobbledygook and take away money from police officers who actually keep our communities safe, and when you're called on the record, you deny it. It's all there in black and white, and your record is there in black and white, and it's a disgrace.
We reduced homicides by 31%, and as someone who's been shot and nearly killed, I take offense that you would think that
I
the
take
last
offense
13
that you
years
won't answer my
we're not
questions,
focused on
that you
reducing
deny your
violence.
own words, and that you are leading this committee astray. And frankly, sir, your policies are absurd. They're absurd.
I don't think we're getting any place, so let's.
We can keep going.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you very much. I have the following information from the Council of State Governments and the FBI, and that is that Alaska, Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, and Kansas all have violent crime rates in 2024 that are worse than Illinois. And Memphis, Little Rock, Cleveland, Kansas City, St. Louis, and Dayton all have worse violent crime rates in 2024 than Chicago. If you look at gun homicide rates, the top 8 counties for gun homicides in the United States of America are City of St. Louis County, Missouri, Washington County, Mississippi, Holmes County, Mississippi, Hinds County, Mississippi, LaFleur County, Mississippi, Orleans Parish, Louisiana, Coahoma County, Mississippi, and Dallas County, Alabama. So I think the people in those places have just as much of a right to a safe community as folks in Chicago do. But seems from the actual statistics that it's way more dangerous to live in those places than it is in Chicago. I also want to say, having been the U.S. Attorney for my state of Rhode Island, and having been the Attorney General, those of you who don't know Attorneys General may not know that there are 3 states where the Attorney General has full criminal jurisdiction: Delaware, Alaska, and Rhode Island. No DAs. It all came through me. So we worked a lot on crime issues and on community policing issues. And here are some of the results that were achieved after the transition to community policing began and after the engagement with the Providence Police and the community improved. From 1990 to 2024, decreases in total violent crime down 73%. Robbery down 87.5%. Aggravated assault down 63%. In property crimes, overall down 81%. Burglary down 95%. Larceny, down 66%. Vehicle theft, down 91%. These are transformative numbers, and behind them are people's lives that were not burdened by crime because the Providence Police did a very good job of transitioning to a new way of policing. And behind them came our court system. We now have a drug court. I actually flipped the switch that kicked that loose when I was Attorney General. We now have a veterans court. If you want to spend a high-quality day, go look at graduation in veterans court, where the veterans and the family gather around the individual after he's completed the work, and instead of going out the back door in handcuffs, he's going out with his family into the hallway to go home with very, very low recidivism rates. We've even started a mental health court to deal with the interaction between mental health issues and criminal activity and engagement with law enforcement. So we know what works. We've proven what works. We didn't need soldiers running around on our streets to make it work. We made it work because the Providence Police and other Rhode Island departments, but Providence is our major metropolitan area, so I focus on them, because the Providence Police changed their way of doing business. And I can attest that community relations between all the different elements of our community in Providence and the Providence Police are pretty excellent. So good that our former police chief was brought down to DOJ to run the police relations for the Department of Justice. So there's a way to do this. Doesn't require yelling and shouting, doesn't require military deployment into streets, requires police officers doing the good job that they know how to do, backed up by courts that know how to make the distinction between somebody who's a real criminal and somebody who has a mental health issue, and somebody who's a veteran who needs more support, and somebody who needs a drug interdiction. We can do this better than we are, and I hope that my comments have been somewhat helpful in trying to reboot this conversation.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Now, Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Mr. Pemberton, I've watched a lot of the testimony and questions in my office before I got here. And I think you did a good job of responding to the question about the January 6th violence. But let me tell you, I think every single person who got pardoned, who was convicted, clearly convicted of assaulting a police officer, I think should still be in prison if their term went beyond today. And I think it was a horrible statement made to the Capitol Police to do anything else. There were a lot of people, and the thing in this committee where people raised their voices and kind of talked past each other, they didn't mention that there were several people that were over-prosecuted, probably shouldn't have been in prison, shouldn't have been put to the expense. But man, there were a lot of people that should still be in prison. Ms. Cook, I'm sorry for your loss. Washington, D.C. to me strikes me as a unique jurisdiction where I believe that the president was absolutely right to surge resources here to settle down the situation. I've lived here in this city in my capacity as senator for the last 10 years. And Ms. Cook, I was over in Northern Virginia before I moved down to North Carolina. And I've seen the ebb and flow of crime here. And I'm glad that the president did what he did here to make our community safer, your community safer. I'm very sorry about your grandson. But Mr. Taylor, I got a real problem with this idea of us going to various states. I had a brother actually serving in the legislature in Tennessee. I grew up in Tennessee. Go Vols. They're having a decent season for a change. But I was Speaker of the House in North Carolina, and to be honest with you, if I saw the President of the United States surging resources in North Carolina as a Speaker of a House when I had a supermajority, I'd consider it a personal failure on my part, that I hadn't figured out in working with the governor how to make my state safer. And the reason I say that is that I agreed to a certain extent with the testimony on the National Guard. I've spent a lot of time in communities, and I know that law enforcement, Mr. Pemberton, I want to ask you a question about this. It's a lot like you hear with special operators operating in very dangerous places around the world, that you need community engagement. You need law enforcement officers on the street that are actually welcomed by the community. They're out there. They know the people, the de facto leaders, the people that give them an idea of where the unsafe places are. So it's not just about the strong arm of law enforcement. It's the right balance. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important that we have the ability to interact with the citizens, to communicate with the citizens, develop those relationships.
Yeah. So I guess the question I have is, why in the hell are we letting off elected officials in Memphis and other cities who are failing the people that elected them? Why are we letting them off? Mr. Taylor, why should I let the mayor of Memphis or the mayor of Bolivar or the mayor of several other cities that have an incident rate that's unacceptable, why should I allow federal dollars and resources beyond the joint task forces that go on every day in Tennessee and North Carolina? Why should you all welcome, number one, acknowledge that Tennessee can't get it done without federal intervention, and number two, let these liberal elected officials off the hook and mask a systemic problem that's going to come back the minute the National Guard goes away? Why is that a good thing?
Well, it's not a good thing. And what I would recommend that this body consider, and I said it in my opening statement, the left and the progressive nonprofits that I talked about, for years, they have pushed the Justice Department to come into these communities and use the consent decrees.
I'd like to spend some more time. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to try and stay on time here. I think we're making a huge mistake by going in and papering over a fundamental problem. It's only going to be solved while we're there with some police presence. It's going to go away. But Mr. Jackson, I also want, you mentioned in your testimony the Safer Communities Act. I was one of the people that negotiated this bill and passed it. I do want to tell you something. I wish that I had there's a lot of good in this bill, and all the bad that some of my colleagues said was going to happen when we voted against it, they're all dead wrong. It's been all good. Hadn't been bad. But let me tell you what I wished I had been able to do. I wish I had been able to put into law that no jurisdiction that has cashless bail, that's a sanctuary jurisdiction, any of those things could be qualified for any of these behavioral health resources, because there's plenty of people now, plenty of municipalities, plenty of other governments that could benefit from that. But I don't want this to go into an area where it's going to be sub-optimized because of the failure of elected leaders that allow horrible things like happened to Ms. Cook. So I'd like for folks to stop talking past each other. You seem like a good man. You're a victim of gun violence. But folks, we've got to turn around and look. I got to look at Republicans that are failing and tell them to man up, person up, whatever you want to call it, and start protecting these communities. But the liberal leaders who are failing these communities should not get a dime of the stuff that I worked hard to get produced, if in fact they're making their communities less safe. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, may I finish my comment, because I really think it's important and to the point of Senator
If you do it shortly, a couple minutes.
What I was going to say is that what's critically important to hold these officials accountable, Senator Tillis, is that the Justice Department in the past has come into communities and entered into consent decrees, forcing the police to tie their hands when fighting crime. We now need to reverse that. We need to come into, you all need to come into those communities with the Justice Department and force the DA and the justice system to enforce these tough on crime policies so that we can save people's lives. We need to take their playbook and flip it. And I think that'll make Memphis safer, and it'll make a lot of communities around the country safer.
It's a great point, Senator. Thank you. Senator Ronald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. All of our cities and communities should be safe. It doesn't matter whether the communities are led by Democratic or Republican governors or mayors. And as Senator Whitehouse pointed out, there are high crime rates and places where led by Republicans. So all this focus on somehow it's the Democratic-led cities that are more crime-ridden is just full of you know what. And I think we need to get off this kind of politicization of of the safety of our cities. Let's just pay attention to what we can do to make sure that our cities are safe. And that means funding the police in appropriate ways. And if I hear one more time that all we Democrats want to defund the police, it's like, you know what? Do you not even listen to any of us who say that is not our position? I mean, is there any understanding of the fact that we are not all in that boat? My gosh. You know, it's just really, the word ridiculous comes to mind when people are yelling and screaming about positions that we are not even taking. And as long as we are looking at facts, why don't we? Why don't we look at facts? Why don't we look at how we can truly prevent crime, how we need to train our police? We need to have, I would say, community policing is a good way for our people to trust our police officers, to have a relationship with them. Those are all good things to support. But unfortunately, we have a regime that, for example, the Department of Justice canceled over $800 million in public safety grants, including $100 million in grants for violence prevention. Now, this is the administration that wants to prevent violence, that wants to send National Guard to cities that they politically determine is violence-ridden, not true, and yet they are making these kinds of cuts. See, the inconsistency is awesome. I have a question for General Enyart. Now, I mentioned that this regime is politicizing our military by sending the National Guard to various cities. I happen to be the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Readiness Subcommittee, and I am deeply concerned about the impact of domestic military deployments on force readiness. And every additional deployment has a cascading effort on other missions and limits training opportunities. So for you, General, what impact would you expect on the National Guard's readiness as thousands of troops are deployed around the country for domestic policing? General?
Thank you, Senator. As you point out, every day that a guardsman is deployed in the streets of Los Angeles or Chicago or Washington, D.C., is a day that is not spent doing the training that they need to do in order to keep up their military skills, in order to maintain those military skills. If a National Guardsman is walking around Washington, D.C., as I saw 4 of them walking around last night, or they're picking up trash, or they're spreading compost, those are not military tasks. Those are not the tasks that they need to be trained for in order to defend our nation. And it has a very adverse impact on readiness, as well as an adverse impact on morale, which will directly affect recruiting and retention.
It would be really nice if people could acknowledge that the National Guard has a mission, and it is not to go into cities where, especially where they're not requested to do so, to do policing. And that would have a negative impact, I would think, on their morale. Wouldn't you agree, General?
That is correct. Not only on the soldiers' morale, but let's look at the families. You know, the families are losing their loved one to go off somewhere and stand around taking selfies in front of the Washington Monument. That's not what guardsmen do. It's also an adverse impact on employers, which will directly impact recruiting in the future.
I'm running out of time, but I did want to ask Mr. Jackson, as I came in just as you were getting yelled at by one of my colleagues, but as I mentioned, this regime has cut large amounts in grants that I think would go toward safer communities. So based on your experience with evidence-based community violence intervention, what do you expect to be the impact of these cuts by the Trump regime?
I mean, unfortunately, we know it's going to impact our ability to prevent violence before it happens. You know, when we talk about the historic reductions we're seeing across the country, it's a direct result of investing in violence prevention efforts, but also holding those accountable that are bringing guns into our communities. And both of those are under siege. ATF is being defunded. Victim services have lost $1 billion. Community violence intervention has lost $812 million. Mental health resources has lost $1 billion. So this administration has cut tremendous dollars on both ends, law enforcement and investing in prevention.
And I think there's a direct correlation between violent crime in our communities and very strict gun legislation, gun laws. And Hawaii has one of the lowest violent crime rates because we have very strong gun laws that protect our community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Welch.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the witnesses. I actually don't have a lot of questions because I do have a concern that this issue is getting very politicized. None of us want whatever amount of crime we have in our communities. We just don't want it. It's terrible. And that is a concern that all of our residents, all of the people you represent have. All of you are dedicated to law enforcement. But the objection I have to the use of the Guard is the manner in which it's being done. It does appear to be a very political decision on the part of the administration about whether to deploy, when to deploy. Some of these issues that my colleague from North Carolina was mentioning, bail issues, penalties, things that you're concerned about, I know. Those are national. I mean, every community has to make its decision, but those are fair and square debates to have. What's the right way to treat a person who is an offender? But, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that I notice is that we get into this political debate about this when, in fact, there's contradictions here. The per capita murder rate in states run by Republicans is 50% higher than it is in Democratic states. I don't draw a conclusion that that means that Republican-led states are soft on crime, but the assertion that's being made constantly by the administration is that Democratic states are being soft on crime. In Vermont, we spend a lot of money on law enforcement. It's a big deal in our state, even though we have a relatively, fortunately, lower crime rate. Vermont spends $368 per capita on policing. That's what we spent in 2023. That's more than was spent in Iowa, South Carolina, Texas, Utah, and Alabama. The other thing that is troubling to me is our local law enforcement, like in Vermont and I know in Iowa, they have been beneficiary of some of these federal grants. Made a real difference when I talk to some of our police chiefs. They've made a real difference in their capacity to be responsive and to get the best training possible. And the Department of Justice cut 373 anti-crime grants unilaterally. I'm pretty upset about that. And my understanding, Mr. Chairman, you get your phone calls returned from the White House. So my understanding is you were able to intervene and help your folks in Iowa. So God bless you. I'm not sure I get the same reception when I call the White House, right? So I don't think this should be on a political basis. If these cop grants are good, let's get them spread out to the communities that need them as much as possible. And it shouldn't be just on the basis that you're the Senate President Pro Tem that you're able to take care of your state, but the rest of us don't quite have that clout. So I acknowledge your position here, but I don't think it should be unique to Iowa that you get your senator to be able to get those grants. We've got to get those grants out and show respect for law enforcement. Another issue that's a real problem, we have in Burlington, homelessness, drug abuse, and public spaces are not safe for many folks. And there's a mental health issue when I talk to my police chief about what needs to be done, and that has to be part of the equation. So, talking about bail policies is important, talking about penalties is important, but talking about mental health is important too, because a lot of folks have been kicked out on the street. We don't have treatment facilities that are needed, and those folks are out on the street and ultimately end up in the criminal justice system. It's something I know. I was a public defender for a number of years, and a lot of the folks I represented, their crime essentially was that they had a severe untreated mental illness, and in frustration, ultimately, they ended up in the criminal justice system and oftentimes in jail when everyone acknowledged that this was a mental health more than a criminal conduct issue. So I feel sad, frankly, about the politicization of this issue and sending Guard. And we have wonderful National Guard in Vermont, but like you were saying, they're trained for military missions. And in fact, they serve with great distinction in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we, as a rural state, have that situation that rural states often have where our enlistment rate, our volunteer rate is high because people really want to defend the country and do that. So I just have a lament here, Mr. Chairman, that this issue is something that we should be working on together, because any crime in our communities is really a threat to our communities. So I want to thank the witnesses and to some extent apologize for taking the senatorial prerogative of giving my 5 minutes in the form of a speech instead of a question, but thank you.
You five people have been very patient. I thank you for coming here and sharing your stories. We all believe that all life is precious, but it seems like we've accepted for too long of a period of time that violent crime can be a part of life. That's not the case. It shouldn't be the case. So I thank you for coming, and I'll call the second panel now. I think before the panel sits down, before you take your seats and before I introduce you, I think I'll ask you to swear so I can save you some time and me some time. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. Mr. Gomanis has a 3-decade career in law enforcement, working with the Radford and Norfolk, Virginia Police Departments. He joined DEA's Miami Division 2004 and has still remained there. The DEA has had a great success this year. Just between the 4 days of August 25th and 29th, Mr. Gomanis, Washington Division, reported 25 arrests, seizures of 41 firearms, $350,000 in money and assets, 378 kilograms of illicit drugs. Looking outside of the district, DEA's Chicago field office seized multiple kilograms of fentanyl and 25 firearms from 2 Chicagoans' residences and their storage unit earlier this week as part of Operation Take Back America. Mr. Markakos has been with the Marshal Service since 2022, has done extensive work across the Capital Region on fugitive apprehensions and missing child recoveries. Since August, the Capital Area Regional Fugitive Task Force has apprehended an alleged M13 member who harbored a 16-year-old girl that's been reported missing, and 3 suspected gang members, one of which was wanted for first-degree murder. Operation Making the District of Columbia Safe and Beautiful made over 1,000 arrests, seized 115 illegal firearms in just 19 days. Looking at Chicago last week, the Marshal Service recovered a missing child from Rochester in company of 2 adult men who were in the country illegally. I'm sure the girls' parents are grateful for the Marshal's work to bring their daughter home. In Tennessee, Operation Memphis Streets led to the arrest of 141 violent fugitives, including 14 wanted for homicide, and clearing 163 arrest warrants in Memphis. I appreciate both of your leadership in combating crime and looking forward to hearing your testimony. I'm going to allow the person that wants to speak for 5 minutes to speak for the agency, since you gave one report for the whole administration instead of 2 separate statements. So whoever wants to go for 5 minutes, and then the next one will have 1 minute. Proceed.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today regarding Operation Making DC Safe and Beautiful. As the United States Marshal Service Acting Associate Director for Investigations, I am honored to appear before you today and to represent an agency with a storied history of upholding the rule of law. I have had the pivotal opportunity and a pivotal role in Operation Making DC Safe and Beautiful. I am responsible for managing the investigative functions for the United States Marshal Service, ensuring federal law enforcement is optimized to work together interagency with the Metropolitan Police Department. Protecting the District of Columbia has been a part of my life and my professional career. It was almost 22 years ago that I was promoted to become a criminal investigator and assigned to District Court in the District of Columbia. During my time at DC District Court, I was selected to serve on the Capital Area Regional Fugitive Task Force as a team leader, directing teams of federal, state, and local law enforcement officers conducting fugitive apprehension missions. Just 2 years ago, I was honored to be designated as the acting United States Marshal for the District of Columbia. During my tenure, I worked extensively with federal and local law enforcement partners. Every day from coast to coast, U.S. Marshals arrest hundreds of violent fugitives as we work side by side with our federal, state, and local partners. Our district and regional fugitive task forces are a model of how federal resources and expertise complement state and local efforts to reduce the scourge of violent crime. This partnership is the core model we are using in Operation Making DC Safe and Beautiful. The Metropolitan Police Department identifies the areas of violent crime, and using our additional federal resources, we act as a force multiplier to focus law enforcement on criminal activity. Federal officers are working seamlessly beside MPD to patrol, respond, and identify the drivers of crime. The National Guard provides administrative support, and their presence frees up other officers to focus on law enforcement. I am proud to report to you today that our effort is working. Since the operation began on August 7, we have sharply reduced crime in the nation's capital. There has been a 39% drop in violent crime since we started this operation. Carjackings are down 75%. As of today, federal law enforcement have made 3,496 arrests, averaging 65 per day. These include charges for 13 homicides, 284 firearms violations, and 472 narcotics offenses. Our teams have seized 302 firearms. Every gun seized is a removed threat to the community. We have apprehended 25 gang members, including high-risk targets, and recovered 10 missing children, safeguarding the most vulnerable among us. These results are not just statistics, they resonate in crime-ravaged communities. During this operation, Deputy U.S. Marshals have heard nothing but appreciation from DC's residents. A community long in pain is now healing. The gratitude of residents highlights the operation's real impact on daily lives. A major faction in DC public safety crisis is the soft on crimes policies These endanger residents by failing to hold criminals accountable. As law enforcement veterans know, without accountability, offenders will re-offend. I urge Congress to consider legislation that will help hold DC criminals accountable. Policies like cashless bail release most arrestees without monetary conditions, creating a revolving door for violent offenders. This burdens officers, including Deputy U.S. Marshals, recapturing the same individuals often for identical crimes. It wastes resources, endangers communities, and erodes police morale. For instance, among our thousands of arrests since August 7, we've faced repeat offenders like an MS-13 gang member with 7 prior convictions. The DC Safe and Beautiful Task Force, partnering with the U.S. Attorney, ensures that dangerous arrestees are held accountable. We've deployed 83 multi-agency teams across DC's 7 patrol districts, collaborating with local and federal partners to hit crime hotspots flagged by MPD intelligence. Our officers boost presence and visibility, ensuring violent offenders face justice. These gains stem from our unified command's efficiency and our alignment with President Trump's vision for a safe and beautiful capital. We're proud of the 22 agencies supporting this operation. I especially want to recognize major federal contributors such as the DEA, FBI, ATF, U.S. Park Police, ICE, and Homeland Security investigations, among other partners who serve alongside the U.S. Marshal Service. We thank President Trump for deploying the National Guard as a force multiplier for logistics and visibility. I also commend Metropolitan Police Department leadership and the Mayor's Office for embracing federal partners, maximizing the value of every officer on the streets. This federal-local synergy proves collaboration transforms public safety. U.S. Marshal Service Director Seralta has been tasked with this coordination of the overall federal response. Under his leadership, we stand united with our partners to make Washington, D.C. a safe and proud capital again. We're catching criminals, ending catch and release, and ensuring the capital is free for its residents, visitors, and commuters. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Goanis.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and members of this committee, thank you for holding this hearing today. Before I begin my remarks, I want to address the violence that has occurred over the past year. Political shootings have shaken our nation, from the 2 assassination attempts on then-candidate Trump to more recently the shootings of Minnesota state legislatures, Charlie Kirk, and the targeting of ICE agents. We don't solve our differences with bullets in this country. We solve them by talking, by listening, and by coming together in hearings like this one to face the hard truths and find solutions to keep our communities safe. I come before you with over 28 years of law enforcement experience. I began my career, as the chairman stated, with the Norfolk and Radford City Police Departments. I joined DEA in 2004 as a special agent. Since then, I've served in the Atlanta Division, Raleigh District Office, DEA headquarters in both the Office of Inspections as well as the Office of Professional Responsibility, and most recently here in Richmond, Virginia. Throughout my career, I've established joint task forces to address international narcotics smuggling and money laundering, as well as local community issues like violent crime and drug trafficking. It has been my life's work to tackle violent crime, drug trafficking, and money laundering domestically and abroad. Washington, D.C. should be the safest city in America. Instead, in recent years, it's become a place of fear. This past June, a congressional intern was gunned down just blocks from the White House, and 2 embassy staffers were murdered. Just recently, an off-duty firefighter, Washington, D.C. firefighter, was gunned down. Unfortunately, these are not isolated incidents, but signs of a capital city in crisis. This is not the capital worthy of our nation's pride, and nor is it the standard safety and dignity our capital should represent. We need a capital that reflects the strength and the security of our republic. Now, some will tell you crime was down, but tell that to the victims of violent crime or to the families that have lost their child to fentanyl trafficking. If people don't feel safe, they aren't safe. And those who lived, worked, or visited D.C. weren't feeling safe, so President Trump took bold action. I was honored to be asked by DEA Administrator Terrence Cole to help execute the President's executive order making the District Columbia safe and beautiful. 83 multi-agency agencies drawn from 22 federal, state, and local partners hit the streets across 7 patrol districts. The results are undeniable, as the Marshal state. Robbery is down over almost 50%. Carjackings have dropped nearly 80%. Violent crime has fallen nearly 40%. Since August, law enforcement alone has made over 3,500 arrests. 13 for homicide, 289 for firearm violations, 475 for narcotics violations. We've seized 339 firearms in the district, arrested 28 known gang members, including members of the MS-13, and recovered 10 missing children and cleared numerous danger encampments. These are real results. These save lives. We've had success, but success cannot and should not be undermined by the continuation of D.C. soft on crime policies and a culture of leniency where police risk their lives to take criminals off the street only to see those offenders back out the next day, and in some cases, before we even finish processing evidence. This is a betrayal of law enforcement, a betrayal to our officers. Every time an offender is released, Mr. Grassley, without consequence, it strengthens the criminal ecosystem like the cartels such as Sinaloa and CJ&G feed upon and exploit. These cartels and foreign terrorist organizations flood our streets with fentanyl and methamphetamine, profiting from addiction and death. These organizations play a part in the crime that has plagued D.C. In the past several weeks, during targeted operations on the top of the work being done by the executive order, DEA has made more than a dozen arrests in the district on individuals with ties to Sinaloa and CJ&G. As part of the arrest, we seized over 125 kilograms of fentanyl, cocaine, and marijuana, and we've taken more than 20 other firearms off the street related to these cartels.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. You've been in law enforcement. I'm asking my first question of you. You've been in law enforcement for 30 years, working in areas with progressive prosecutors and soft on crime policies. You've even served local police departments, as you and I both said. How have soft on crime policies and progressive prosecutors impacted investigations that you've worked on?
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, for that question. Since approximately 2020, law enforcement has began to move away from proactive policing, or what we call in the field the broken windows theory policing, to more of a reactive way of policing. This movement was sped up after several high-profile critical incidents involving police in the summer of 2020. Lawmakers, prosecutors, and even police officials passed policies and procedures limiting the patrol officers' ability to engage in proactive policing. Prosecutors began scrutinizing arrests as well as requests for indictments by different branches of law enforcement. There became a practice of releasing criminals immediately after an arrest rather than keeping them incarcerated. Legislatures followed suit by passing cashless bail or pushing for people to be released on personal recognizance bonds, regardless of the crime committed. This practice has allowed for a revolving door of criminals in and out of the justice system in prisons. Incarcerations have been shortened, sentences have been reduced, criminals have become emboldened. Criminals started to no longer fear arrests, convictions, and incarcerations. In worst case, morale for our officers have dropped. Here in D.C., the D.C. Superior Court routinely releases criminals on a personal recognizance bond, shortly right after they've been arrested. As I stated earlier, most of the time they're released before my agents even finish processing the evidence. I'll give you an example. August 24th, 2025, in the middle of the Making D.C. Safe and Beautiful surge, a defendant was arrested by Metropolitan PD in support by my agents and other federal agencies. And the person was arrested with possession of crack cocaine, possession of fentanyl, and a stolen firearm. This individual had a very long criminal history to include several armed robberies. One of my agents was notified of the arrest and operating in a support role, worked with the District of Columbia United States Attorney's Office to obtain an arrest warrant and pull the case out of D.C. Superior Court and bring it into federal court. Within 1 day, we obtained a warrant for the individual. We went over to D.C. Superior Court to serve the warrant, and the individual had already been released. With a criminal history such as multiple criminal robberies.
I think you've satisfied my answer to that question. I want to go to Mr. Michaelos. The task force that you're a member of here in Washington was tasked with making the failed DC crime lab fully accredited after losing that accreditation under the district's leadership. Thanks to an external audit, it was exposed that the district officials found the lab engaged in fraudulent behavior and misrepresentations, deliberately concealed mistakes, and failed to address the alleged misconduct by examiners. What progress is being made to bring the lab back into full accreditation?
Senator, thank you for your question. Within the U.S. Marshal Service, we don't have any purview over the D.C. Crime Lab. Having previously served as the acting U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia, I was aware that D.C.'s Crime Lab had lost certification, but I'd be happy to take back that question back to the DOJ so we can follow up with an answer for you.
Please do that. Mr. Guenas, critics of the Trump administration immigration efforts claim that the agents are arresting peaceful migrants without any connection to crime or criminal backgrounds. How do you respond to that? And in answering my question, can you explain how hard it is to access foreign criminal history?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. Let me premise this by saying DEA's first priority is drug investigations. We always prioritize them. When our brothers and sisters at the Department of Justice or in Homeland Security request our assistance, we'll always answer the call. DEA will always support our federal brothers and sisters. Homeland Security has asked us, but we're strictly in a support role, and we assist the Homeland Security in their Title VIII investigations. Now, I am fortunate, being at the Washington Division Office, that I have Homeland Security special agents as well as ERO officers assigned to my federal drug task forces. So again, they're the leads. We assist, provide them security, and any leads that are generated from those, I would have to refer you back to the Homeland Security because, again, our priority being drug investigation, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Senator Mooney's going to take over for me so I can go to another meeting.
She's tough on time.
Okay.
So I better hurry up.
Go ahead, please.
Thanks for being here. I'm going to ask you both the same question to apply to your agencies, DEA and U.S. Marshal's Office. How many fill-in-the-blank U.S. Marshals personnel, DEA personnel, have been assigned additional immigration enforcement work or reassigned entirely to immigration enforcement since the start of this year? Mr. Marquetos?
Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. We have seen, or at least I have seen within the purview of my supervision over the agency's investigative functions, that we have utilized and leveraged our investigative resources towards assisting our DHS partners with immigration enforcement efforts. I want to make it abundantly clear, though, the number one priority as...
Can you give me a number? How many? We hear it's 1,000. Is it 1,000?
As far as agents of the U.S. Marshal Service, I believe it was in the low 200s, sir.
Out of a total U.S. Marshal Service complement of what number?
Yes, sir.
How many total?
It was 200, around 200, sir.
How many total number of employees in Marshal Service?
Oh, a total number of employees, I think we're sitting approximately 4,000 operational employees to date.
So would you say 5% of your personnel have been reassigned to Homeland Security or immigration enforcement?
Sir, I wouldn't necessarily say reassign, but supporting DHS efforts.
Okay, let's go to DEA. What's your number?
Senator, I can speak to just for the Washington Division Office, which is the office that I'm the special agent in charge of.
Okay. How many total employees going into the year?
Into what city? Because I cover 2 states in the district, sir.
You define,
okay,
please.
So DC Nova area, here in the capital area, approximately 7 agents. Baltimore and parts of Maryland, approximately 5 to 7 agents. Agents in Richmond, approximately 2. Norfolk, approximately 1. Roanoke, approximately 1.
Add them up. Give me a number. This is a simple question. How many employees, how many went to immigration?
15, 16, 18. Approximately 20.
Out of how many total?
Out of my entire division, I have approximately 150 special agents, but I also have I have a very robust task force officer program. I have over 180 task force officers. So when my agents are asked to support, because that, again, we're in a support role, our federal partners, we go support, and then my task force officers continue the drug investigations until my agents return to assist.
So approximately 5% of the Marshal Service and 10% of your offices were diverted into immigration work.
10%, it seems a little bit high if you count my task force officers.
Well, you said 20 out of 180. I'm trying to get you to tell me some numbers, but I'm going to stick with those. So has this had any impact on the question of drug prosecutions in this last year?
No, sir, at all. Because, again, I have a robust task force officer program, and those 180 task force officers maintain my Title VIII
Reuters story, September 29th, 2025. The number of people charged with breaking federal drug laws dropped to the lowest in decades this year after the Trump administration ordered enforcement agencies to focus on deporting immigrants. A Reuters review of nearly 2 million federal court records found. So far this year, about 10% fewer people have been prosecuted for drug violations compared to the same period of 2024. Court records show a drop of about 1,200 cases and the slowest rate since at least the late 1990s. So there is a natural concern that this so-called big and beautiful mass deportation is diverting resources that could be used for stopping drug trafficking and crimes. And they go on to say, the pullback was more dramatic for the types of conspiracy and money laundering cases often used to pursue high-level traffickers. The number of people charged with money laundering dropped by 24% this year. So we're paying a price for the great, beautiful mass deportation, despite the fact that 70% of the people who have been stopped by the Office of Homeland Security and accused of drug crimes and, of immigration violations, 70% of them have no criminal record. Would you like to comment on that?
Senator, I appreciate your question, and I did read that article in question. I just saw it yesterday morning. We at the DEA and in the Washington Division, we arrest. We don't have any say in charging, and we don't always take our cases into federal court. A lot of times we take them into state and local courts as well. So again, if you have any questions about charging as well as the reduction of charges, I would refer you to my partners at the United States Attorney's Office.
If you listen to this hearing, I could come back and say, you're soft on crime. You're soft on crime. You're not prosecuting as many cases of drug violators as even under the awesome responsibility of Joseph Biden. You're not keeping up with that standard. Take it away.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I'll just stay along that topic for a moment. Having been a federal prosecutor that worked very closely with federal agencies, including the DEA, having been a wife of a DEA agent and a law enforcement officer, I have some simple questions just to follow up along that line so the American people aren't misled. In fact, in many instances, especially within the DEA ranks, many of our drug traffickers and others who came into the country that went on to coordinate with cartels and other foreign nations, many are here illegally. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
And so with an administration that comes in and takes a look at the resources it has, both financially and with manpower, and decides to shift responsibilities, where if you were to encounter someone that was trafficking drugs within the United States, would this administration now say that person needs to be deported?
Ma'am, it could go both ways. We could prosecute them first for the drug trafficking, depending on the level of narcotics that they're in possession with, their criminal history.
But in many instances, they could be simply deported back to their home country so they couldn't continue to sell drugs within a community.
Yes, ma'am, that does
So
happen.
isn't it true that this administration has shifted resources in many respects? Some of the international water operations have been amplified and assisted by the military now. And in many instances, not just the DEA, but others are helping with those here illegally that are committing crimes, such as in Chicago right now, where they've surged resources to go after those here illegally with crimes, that have committed crimes, right?
Ma'am, as the Washington Division SAC, I really don't want to speak to Chicago because that's a different division.
All right, well, let me talk to you about Washington.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
In Washington, it made perfect sense for the federal agents to assist in going after those that were here illegally that had criminal histories, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in your experience, those that are living here and have had to live in an environment high in crime with no one taking that seriously, were welcoming those efforts, correct?
Yes, ma'am. As a matter of fact, I've been out since August 7th numerous times with people on the streets with the task force. And I can tell you from firsthand, I've probably gotten more thank yous for being out on the street than anything else. I've also received numerous letters as well as verbal accolades for the DEA agents helping Metropolitan PD. Several of these letters that these officers have sent have been very nicely written, thanking us, and their main concern is when we leave. But as I've said, we've always been partnered with Metro PD, and we'll never leave.
Let me start, and I meant to start this way, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that shifting resources when you have an administration that's coming in and wanting to prioritize and get back to mission of protecting communities, that is something that is done repeatedly as administrations change and priorities change, and there could very well be a lot of crossover in those missions, correct?
Yes, ma'am, and I would also
And I
add-
just want to make sure that I'm staying on time here, so let me start by saying thank you to you both for embarking on lifelong careers of law enforcement service. I believe it takes a really special, selfless, brave individual to say, I'm going to put my life, my safety behind others, and I'm going to dedicate my life to that, to protecting communities. That means a lot to me, and I believe that that is why this country is one of the greatest countries on earth, because we have people like you willing to sign up for these roles and enforce the law when we, the people, have come up with the law. So thank you. One of the things that I've been repeatedly upset with recently is the villainization of law enforcement. In fact, just today, as federal agencies were in Chicago trying to arrest people that had committed crimes that were here illegally, the governor of Illinois said that those federal agents were waging war on his people. And in fact, the mayor of Chicago said that, and I quote, law enforcement is a sickness. When all these people that have signed up for these jobs are trying to do is protect others. Here in DC, you had an attorney general when there was carjacking epidemic, and trying to explain why he couldn't protect or do anything about it, said that you can't arrest your way out of this situation. Do you believe that you can protect a community, Mr. Marquetos, by arresting violent criminals and those to seek to do others harm?
Senator, thank you for that question. Absolutely. No question about it.
And do you believe that the rhetoric that has been put forth by so many Democratic leaders around this nation is having an effect on the morale and the job of those like Mr. Gomez and other law enforcement officials around the country?
Senator, the beauty of the U.S. Marshal Service is that we are a non-political organization. We are career law enforcement officials that want to make a difference and safeguard our communities.
And do you believe that they will press on and protect the American people despite all of these statements that I would say incite violence against law enforcement?
Again, Senator, I think with the U.S. Marshal Service uniquely placed in government, with our primary responsibility being the protection of our federal judiciary, the U.S. Marshal Service stands side by side with our state, federal, local law enforcement partners to make a difference and make an impact on violent crime.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse?
Thanks very much, Chairman. Mr. Marquetos, welcome. It is one of the jobs of the Marshal Service to provide protection to our federal judges. Is that correct?
Senator, thank you for the question. Absolutely, yes.
And it is a federal crime, for instance, under Section 115, to threaten a judge. Is it not a federal crime?
Senator, off the top of my head, I don't know the statute, but it is a federal crime if you do threaten our federal judges.
And it can also be an obstruction of justice crime to threaten a federal judge if the effort is to influence, intimidate, or impede the judge in the performance of his or her duties. Is that not also correct?
Senator, not knowing intimately the statute, I would concur that any violation or threats against our federal judiciary should be investigated to the fullest extent possible.
Well, here, that's a perfect segue, because what we have is a threatening statute, and we have an obstruction statute that focus largely on the immediate issuer of the threat, the person who sent the threat. But if you look behind those, we also have conspiracy statutes, 371, 372, and 373 to be more specific. And it is also a federal crime to conspire to threaten a judge, is it not? And also a federal crime to conspire to obstruct justice, is it not?
Senator, again, I'm not intimately familiar with the statutes, but I do know that the Judicial Security mission is, without a doubt, one of our core responsibilities in our democracy.
Is it a crime to conspire to threaten a judge?
Senator, I'm not, again, too familiar. If the investigative facts that are presented to the U.S. Attorney's Office dictate that that individual or individuals have threatened the federal judge, then they will pursue charges.
Well, if you don't know whether conspiracy to threaten a judge is a crime or not, you may also not know whether obstruction of justice is a predicate act for purposes of the racketeering statutes. So I'll ask, is Section 1503 obstruction a predicate for a racketeering prosecution under Section 1962?
Senator, again, I'm not intimately familiar with that statute that you're referencing.
So the reason I'm asking these questions, Mr. Marquetos, and I'd like to ask to put these three exhibits into the record, letter of March 31st to James Bredar, letter of April 11th to Mark Patella at the Marshal Service, and my QFR questions to the Director Serralta.
Without objection.
All three of those efforts try to get at whether the Marshal Service is investigating not just the threat emitted by the person who was delivering the threat, but whether there is potentially either a conspiracy or an enterprise engaged in threatening judges. And I can't get an answer to that. It would seem to me that would be a super easy question to answer. Let me ask it a different way. Setting aside prosecution entirely, looking only at the protection responsibilities of the U.S. Marshal Service. If the Marshal Service is unaware of a conspiracy to threaten judges or of an enterprise to obstruct justice, wouldn't that impede its ability to understand the threat environment and respond fully to the protection mission?
Senator, I am not part of the Judicial Security Division, although I did spend many years in the Judicial Security Division. My current portfolio is the investigative operations functions of the Marshal Service. That doesn't necessarily touch the judicial side. However, I can tell you that with our Threat Management Center and our accountability that our Director Serralta has implemented and mandated, that the judicial security mission will come first beyond anything else.
Yep, I hear everybody saying that, but when you narrow the question to whether or not the Marshal Service is willing to investigate conspiracy to threaten or a racketeering enterprise to obstruct, then suddenly it's radio silence. Suddenly it's cricket. Suddenly I can't get an answer. And it's my view that your responsibilities to the federal bench include fully understanding what the risk to judges is. And you cannot turn a blind eye to the prospect of there being conspiracies or enterprises or orchestration of threats and still be doing your protection job fully. And to the extent you're back in your territory of doing investigations, it is in fact a crime to conspire to threaten a judge, and it is in fact a crime to participate in an enterprise with the predicate act of obstruction of justice. And my question, my challenge to you at this point, since I can't get a straight answer, is have you foregone that responsibility for fear of where those investigations will lead? And you can get back to me. My time is up, so I'll leave that with you as a question for the record. And I hope I have better luck than I did with respect to my previous request on this same subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Blumenthal?
Thank you, Senator Moody. Thank you both for being here and for your work in law enforcement. Ms. Marquetos, actually, I think it's your joint testimony. Both you and Mr. Gumenes make the point that local government's failure to enforce accountability exacerbated this crisis, meaning the law enforcement crisis. And then you cite, and I'm quoting, intentional reduction of the police force and low sentences for firearms offenses and violent crime. So I'm trying to find areas of agreement here, because I think there should be. I was the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut for 4.5 years, and I was Attorney General of our state. And when I was working on these kinds of enforcement issues, generally, you know, it was all bipartisan. In fact, it was non-partisan. It was non-political. And so reduction of the police force, not a good idea. In fact, we should be bolstering local police forces in numbers and in training. And sentences for firearms offenses, they should be robust and strong. So I'm wondering how we justify cutting the Department of Justice programs that increase the number of police, the burn grant programs, about $1 million in cuts there. Do you have any opinion on that?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the grants in the Department of Justice's status and posture as it relates to those, but what I can report to you on is the thousands of specially deputized local police officers that we have on our both capital and district task forces around the country, our regional fugitive task forces.
You've deputized them.
Specially deputized local law enforcement.
Work for you?
They work for the United States Marshal Service.
And you take them away from local policing?
Actually, sir, we serve, as you indicated, as a surge aspect. We bring federal resources coupled with the local expertise to make an impact on violent crime.
Do you increase the number of police?
We do not have control of increasing
No,
local
you
police
don't,
departments.
but I'm talking about the grants in the Department of Justice that increase the number of police. You talked about the reduction of the number of police, and I agree with you. We need to increase the number of police. So this is not a trick question. And I respect your expertise in what the Marshal Service does, but shouldn't we have more police, not fewer? Let me ask you another question. Low sentences for firearms offenses. To increase the severity of firearms sentences, don't we need more investigation, more aggressive use of ATF, which is responsible for investigating firearms offenses? So let me ask you, Mr. Gumenes, are you in favor of the DEA-ATF merger?
Senator, thank you for your question. As especially in charge, that's above my responsibilities. But I will tell you this, I am fortunate that I have ATF in the bulk of my groups, in my enforcement groups in the division. In any firearms investigation, we work together and we generate leads, we pass them. We also have ATF at our Special Operations Division, which is 37 different agencies. So any leads generated that we've done from our arrest and seizures and passed to them, they run with, they continue, and any type of deconfliction is done through SOD.
So wouldn't you agree that they should be increased in the resources they have? And as you know, they've been cut.
Senator, again, I don't want to speak for the ATF. I can tell you that the ATF assigned to the DEA task forces are doing very good work, and we appreciate their partnership.
And how about the DEA? It has been cut in resources, hasn't it?
Senator, my division has not been cut. And as a matter of fact, I've been fortunate to obtain additional task force officers, as well as task force officer positions, as well as special agent positions. As a matter of fact, one of the things that Administrator Cole—
But I'm talking overall, and I apologize for interrupting, but I'm about to run out of time. Overall, DEA and ATF have been cut in the resources made available. Maybe not your SAC, your section in D.C., but overall, both DEA and ATF have been cut in resources available.
Again, Senator, I haven't seen my budget cut. I would refer you back to the Department of Justice if there's a
Okay.
question of
Thank
that
you.
nature.
My time has expired. Thank you both.
Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Senator Moody, and thank you to our witnesses today for your service and for all that the U.S. Marshals and the DEA have done nationally and in my home community. I spent a decade in county government. I was the county executive for 6 years and responsible for the second largest law enforcement agency in our small state of 1 million people. But my agency did policing for 500,000 people. And we benefited from many federal task forces, from working with ATF, with FBI, with DEA, with the Marshal Service in order to clear warrants that had been long unserved, to arrest dangerous felons who'd come to our state from the region, to investigate and bust gangs that were dealing in drugs. Federal resources really can help local law enforcement. And I'm the co-chair of the Bipartisan Law Enforcement Caucus with Senator Cornyn. And frankly, we recently did an event on judicial safety where we heard from federal, state, and local judges who had been threatened. If I might just follow up on what Senator Whitehouse was asking briefly, Mr. Marquetos, I assume he was referring to the very recent rise, the alarming rise, in the delivery of pizzas to the homes of federal judges and their families using the name of Daniel Anderl, who's the murdered son of New Jersey Federal District Court Judge Esther Salas. I've heard from federal judges about their alarm about this so-called pizza doxing, and that it's happened not a few times, but literally over 100 times nationally. Is this something the Marshals Service is investigating, the potential for there being a conspiracy to deliver these pizzas all over the country to federal, district, and circuit court judges and their families at their homes?
Senator, thank you for that question. Again, the Judicial Security Mission will and always will remain the focal point of the United States Marshals Service. Under
so
the
are you
leadership,
investigating the possibility of a conspiracy that's actually delivering in an organized way these pizzas to threaten our federal judiciary?
Senator, I am aware of this inappropriate activity, and the Marshal Service is looking into it.
Thank you. I'd welcome more information about what exactly you're doing. My hometown, to get back to my main point, forgive me, the city of Wilmington and Newcastle County saw a steady rise in violent crime over a number of years for a variety of reasons. And under the two previous administrations, first Trump administration, Biden administration, I worked hard to ask for, get, and deliver more federal law enforcement resources that in partnership with our city, county, and state police did a remarkable job. Part 1 crimes, and in particular murder, robbery, rape, are down significantly compared to where they were just several years ago. It's been a real positive story of more policing resources delivering a safer community. What I'm concerned about, bluntly, is the way this whole hearing was framed. Framing crime as a blue city issue, I think disrespects the hard work of law enforcement, the impact on communities, the victims and their families that yearn for real solutions. When we've got some very positive, concrete stories in both red cities and blue cities and red states and blue states about real progress in fighting crime and bringing it down. My concern is that this year, the Trump administration has taken concrete actions that have canceled hundreds of millions of dollars of the Office of Justice Program grants, including some that were helping in my community, effective gun violence prevention, policing and prosecution programs, and victim support services, literally defunding our local police, and diverting federal agents and prosecutors who've been investigating violent crime, drugs, and corruption in my home community to a mass deportation agenda, and that has rolled back common sense gun safety regulations. So, Mr. Gumenis, if I might, can you just answer, Reuters is reporting that federal drug arrests and prosecutions are down this year compared to last year, and in fact that prosecutions are at the lowest level in decades, which some sources in the story attribute to the decline in focus on these areas and refocusing on immigration. Have you seen a slowdown in arrests in your area of responsibility? And what's your explanation for the slowdown in prosecutions that may have resulted?
Senator, thank you for the question. I believe that that article was referencing just prosecutions, but for arrests in my AOR, I'm actually up this year. As a matter of fact, my division has seized more fentanyl this year than we did last year. So for my division, our arrests are up.
I think that's good news. More broadly, we've seen the diversion of federal law enforcement sources from fighting complex crime to managing and responding to street crime. Since the start of the DC emergency, how much of your manpower in terms of agent hours has been devoted to street patrols, and how's that relate before the emergency? And then is that something all of your agents are doing? And how do they account for the time that takes out of the complex investigations that the DEA is really specifically talented at?
And you can briefly answer.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, thank you for your question, but I think that was about 3 questions, so if I can break them down on each one, if you don't mind.
I think I'm the last questioning senator, so perhaps the chairman will
Okay,
indulge me for a question or two.
No problem, Senator Coons. So we haven't changed our posture. DEA will always answer the call. If it's a long-term investigation to if it's support in the Metropolitan Police Department, support to any state and local agency that's within my AOR, my area of responsibility. I apologize. For example, we started this surge on August 7th, and I had my division kind of pull the numbers, so that's about a month and a half, give or take. We have still arrested 23 individuals. We have still seized $51,000, 28 firearms. We just ran nationwide 2 surges for Sinaloa and CJ&G, the 2 cartels that are poisoning about 95% of our population with the synthetic poisonings that are destroying our communities. 300,000 people in 3 years. So Sinaloa, just in D.C., 8 arrests, 113 kilograms of fentanyl, cocaine, and marijuana, $50,000 in cash, 21 firearms. CJ&G, just in the district, 8 keys of cocaine. If we take that outside the district and include the other 2 states, that's 18 arrests, 1,617 kilos of cocaine, over 2,000 counterfeit pills of fentanyl, 119,000 seized, 32 weapons.
Right.
My agents, Senator, believe in the mission, believe in what DEA does, because we're members of the community. We live in the community. We shop in the community. Our kids go to the same schools as anybody else in the community. We believe in the mission, and we're not going to stop regardless of what it is. Even if they're told to go do something else for a couple hours, they're coming back to fulfill their mission because they believe in the mission of DEA. And it is, as a community member, it breaks my heart to see someone like Ms. Cook sitting over here talking about the death of her son. And the amount of people that I speak to that lose their child to fentanyl trafficking breaks my heart. 300,000 souls that will not be at Christmas or Thanksgiving dinners over the last 3 years because of that synthetic drug and that carnage that the cartels are pushing on our community. So to answer your question, I know it's long-winded, but my men and women at the Washington Division are passionate. And as Senator Moody will tell you, every DEA agent is passionate about what we do, and we will save our communities.
Special Agent Gimenez, thank you. Let me be clear. In my experience, I've seen highly effective DEA agents come to partner with state and local law enforcement, and where local law enforcement was doing the street-level patrolling and the arrests, elevate our ability to actually interdict, investigate, arrest, and then refer for successful prosecution complex drug rings. But I wouldn't, unless there was a dramatic increase in the number of DEA agents, I wouldn't ask those DEA agents to do what the patrol officers of the county police department were doing. And I just want to make sure that we are not taking very specialized and talented DEA agents off mission in order to do something that shows visibility, but doesn't ultimately use your unique skills and talents. I have experienced that passion among the DEA in Delaware, and I'll just conclude by saying I appreciate it. I just hope, as someone who believes in community policing and in federal, state, and local partnership, I hope we are making the best use of your resources and not cutting critical programs that have been shown to work to interdict and fight crime. Thank you. And thank you,
Thank you, Senator Coons. I want to thank our witnesses. I know appearing in front of a Senate Judiciary Committee is not an easy thing. I know it takes a lot of preparation and a lot of communication with your agencies, but we appreciate you making the time to be here. Again, I will end as we should have all begun. Thank you for signing up for these jobs. Thank you for not just becoming officers, but for volunteering to lead them, because I know that is another task all in of itself and keeping up morale these days. I want to thank the Judiciary Committee staff for coming up with and preparing for this hearing. I know that the question of function of our agencies right now is a really important one for us to discuss, especially when we have areas, states, and cities where you might have a mayor, a governor, a city council, none of which are supporting those basic functions that protect the community, when it's necessary to have people come in and step into the breach and take up that cause of protecting vulnerable people and victims of crime. So thank you. This was a very important hearing. Thank you to the staff. This will conclude our hearing. I also want to thank everyone in the audience for being so polite and respectful of the senators and the witnesses today. If the witnesses were asked any questions that you'd like to answer, you may submit those after this hearing. For the record, you can return those to the committee within 2 weeks of receiving the questions, or within 2 weeks of any questions that were asked of you today. With that, this hearing is adjourned.